The autumn sun hung low over Cedar Hollow, painting the dusty streets in shades of copper and gold. It was the kind of evening that should have been peaceful, with folks settling in for supper and the day's work drawing to a close. But peace was a luxury the small Wyoming town hadn't known since Ray Colton had rolled in 3 years prior with his money and his men. Clara Mayfield's boots scraped against the dirt as 2 burly men dragged her down Main Street. Her once neat bun had come undone, brown hair spilling across her shoulders, and her blue calico dress was torn at the sleeve where Jake Murdoch's meaty fingers dug in. The schoolmarm's usual composure had given way to fierce resistance, though her strength was no match for the 2 brutes flanking her. "Let me go!" Clara's voice rang out clear and strong despite her predicament. "You have no right." "Mister, Colton's got all the rights he needs in this town. Missy," growled Murdoch, tightening his grip. His breath reeked of whiskey and tobacco. "You should have kept that pretty mouth shut about them school funds." The second man, a wiry fellow named Dutch Henley, laughed a sound like grinding metal. "Ain't nobody gonna miss one troublesome teacher. Plenty more where you came from." Clara's green eyes flashed with defiance. "The children need those books that money belongs to." A backhanded slap from Murdoch cut her words short, leaving her ears ringing and her cheeks stinging. "Save your preaching for someone who cares." Along the wooden sidewalks, townspeople turned away as the grim procession passed. Mrs. Henderson pulled her young daughter inside the general store, the bell above the door chiming a mournful note. Old Pete at the barber shop lowered his blinds. Even Sheriff Briggs, stationed outside his office, suddenly found the sunset mighty interesting, his badge catching the dying light as he deliberately looked elsewhere. Clara's heart sank at their cowardice, though she couldn't entirely blame them. Ray Colton owned the Lucky Spur Saloon, the largest establishment in town, and with it, he owned the law. His money lined the sheriff's pockets, paid the mayor's gambling debts, and kept anyone who might oppose him either bought or buried. "Please," she called out to a group of ranchers loading supplies. "Someone help me." They hurried to their wagon, eyes downcast. One younger man started forward, but his companion grabbed his arm, shaking his head urgently. They climbed aboard and rattled away, leaving nothing but dust and disappointment in their wake. The Lucky Spur loomed ahead, its gaudy painted sign depicting a golden horseshoe and a scantily clad woman. Even at this early hour, tinny piano music and raucous laughter spilled from its bat-wing doors. The saloon was Ray Colton's kingdom, where whiskey flowed like water and morality went to die. Clara renewed her struggle as they approached, her teaching instincts kicking in. She'd learned long ago that bullies grew bolder when their victims showed fear. She managed to land a solid kick to Dutch's shin, earning a curse and another rough shake. "Feisty one, ain't she?" Murdoch said to his partner. "Boss is gonna enjoy breaking this filly." The words sent ice through Clara's veins, but she lifted her chin. She'd faced down unruly students, survived prairie storms, and buried her mother alone at 17. She wouldn't cower now, not for Ray Colton or any other man who thought might made right. 20 yards from the saloon, the sound of hoofbeats made all 3 of them pause. A lone rider approached from the south road, his silhouette dark against the amber sky. He sat his horse like he was born to it, back straight, movements easy and natural. As he drew closer, Clara could make out weathered leather chaps, a brown duster coat, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. The stranger reined in his horse, a magnificent black stallion, at the hitching post near the saloon. He dismounted with fluid grace, his spurs singing a metallic tune as his boots hit the ground. When he pushed back his hat, Clara glimpsed steel-gray eyes and a face carved by sun and wind, handsome in a rough-hewn way. A day's worth of stubble shadowed his jaw, and a thin scar ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with broad shoulders that spoke of hard work rather than mere size. No badge adorned his chest, no fancy gun rig marked him as a hired gun. Just a simple Colt .45 on his hip and an aura of quiet capability that made even Murdoch and Dutch pause in their task. The stranger's gaze swept over the scene, the two thugs, the struggling woman, the cowering townspeople. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in those gray eyes, like storm clouds gathering over the prairie. "Evening, gentlemen," he said, his voice low and even. It wasn't a greeting so much as an acknowledgement, the way a man might note the presence of rattlesnakes on the trail. "Mind your business, Cowboy." Dutch spat, though his grip on Clara loosened slightly. "This don't concern you." The stranger tilted his head. "Considering, maybe not." He pulled a tobacco pouch from his coat, taking his time rolling a cigarette. "Then again, maybe it does. Hard to enjoy a quiet drink with all this commotion." Murdoch stepped forward, using his free hand to rest on his pistol. "You'd best move along, friend. This here's Mr. Colton's business, and he don't take kindly to interference." "Ray Colton." The stranger struck a match on his boot heel, lighting his cigarette. The flame illuminated his face for a moment, revealing eyes that had seen too much. "Heard that name a time or two, nothing good attached to it." Clara watched this interaction with growing hope and confusion. The man was clearly outnumbered, yet he showed no fear. There was something different about him, something that set him apart from the usual drifters and cowboys who passed through Cedar Hollow. "Last warning," Murdoch growled, his hand tightening on his gun butt. "Walk away now, or get carried away later." The stranger took a long draw on his cigarette, exhaling slowly. "Appreciate the concern for my welfare." His gaze shifted to Clara for the first time, and she saw something flicker there. Recognition? No, that wasn't quite right. More like understanding. "But I reckon I'll take my chances." Dutch cursed under his breath. "Jake, let's just get her inside. Boss is waiting." They started dragging Clara toward the saloon doors again, but the stranger's voice stopped them cold. "The lady doesn't appear to want to go." It wasn't a question. The words hung in the air like the moment before lightning strikes, charged with possibility and danger. "The lady," Murdoch sneered, "is a meddling schoolteacher who don't know when to keep her mouth shut. Now for the last time, no." The stranger dropped his cigarette, crushing it under his boot. "For the first time, let her go." The street seemed to hold its breath. Even the piano music from inside the saloon had stopped, as if the very air recognized the precipice they'd reached. Windows cracked open along Main Street as curiosity overcame caution. The setting sun painted everything in shades of blood and shadow. Clara felt Dutch's hand tremble slightly where he gripped her arm. These men were used to bullying shopkeepers and farmers. Not facing down someone who moved like violence was an old friend. "You got any idea who you're crossing?" Murdoch asked, but the bluster had leaked from his voice. "Got a fair notion." The stranger's hand rested easy near his gun. Not threatening, just ready. "Question is, do you boys want to find out who you're crossing?" The tableau held for several heartbeats. Clara could hear her own pulse thundering in her ears, could smell the mixture of leather, tobacco, and danger that seemed to emanate from the mysterious cowboy. She didn't know who he was or why he'd chosen to intervene, but she recognized the type, a man who'd been pushed to his limits and come out the other side different. Harder, but not necessarily colder. Finally, Murdoch made his choice. "Dutch, get her inside. I'll handle this." He released Clara and went for his gun. The stranger moved like flowing water, smooth and inevitable. His Colt cleared leather before Murdoch's weapon was halfway out. The barrel centered on the big man's chest. "Wouldn't," he said simply. Murdoch froze, his face flushing red. Dutch had stopped moving too. Clara still in his grasp, but his attention fully on the drama unfolding before him. "You pull that trigger," Murdoch said through gritted teeth, "and you'll have every gun in that saloon out here." "Maybe." The stranger's aim never wavered. "But you'll be too dead to see it." The bat-wing doors of the Lucky Spur burst open, and Ray Colton himself emerged, flanked by 4 more gunmen. Clara's breath caught. Colton was a handsome devil. She'd give him that tall and lean, with slicked-back black hair and a mustache waxed to perfection. He wore a burgundy vest over a white silk shirt, every inch the successful businessman, if you ignored the predator's gleam in his dark eyes. Well. Colton's voice was cultured, unlike his hired thugs. He'd come from money back east, Clara had heard, before some scandal sent him west. What have we here, Jake? Why is Miss Mayfield still standing in my street instead of enjoying my hospitality? This cowboy's got some objections. Boss, Murdoch said, still frozen with his hand on his half-drawn pistol. Colton's gaze shifted to the stranger, evaluating. I don't believe we've been introduced. Friend, I'm Ray Colton. I own this establishment, along with most everything else worth owning in Cedar Hollow. Including the law, the stranger asked. A smile played at Colton's lips. The law and I have an understanding. Now, you seem like a reasonable man. Surely we can resolve this without unpleasantness. Miss Mayfield and I simply need to have a conversation about certain accusations she's been making. False accusations, Clara burst out, finding her voice despite Dutch's bruising grip. You stole from the school fund, and I can prove it. Colton's eyes hardened. Such spirit, it's almost a shame to break it. He gestured to his men. Bring her in. As for you, Cowboy, I'll give you 1 chance to ride away. 1 chance more than most would get. The stranger held his position, gun still trained on Murdoch. Appreciate the generosity, but I'll have to decline. See, where I come from, we don't drag ladies around like sacks of grain. Where you come from? Colton studied him more carefully. You've got the look of a man with history. Soldier. Maybe those days are over. Friend, this is my town now. Every kingdom falls, the stranger replied. Some just need a push. The tension ratcheted up another notch. 6 guns against 1 bad odds by any measure. But the stranger stood there like he had an ace up his sleeve, or maybe like he just didn't care about odds anymore. Clara made her decision. If this man was willing to risk his life for a stranger, the least she could do was not make it easy for them to use her as a shield. She suddenly went limp in Dutch's grasp, dropping her full weight to the ground. The surprised gunman stumbled, his grip loosening. It was all the opening needed. The stranger's free hand flashed out, drawing a second gun from the small of his back, a shortened cavalry model. Clara noted with surprise. Both weapons roared, and Dutch screamed, clutching his shooting hand where the bullet had torn through it. Everything erupted into chaos. Murdoch finally cleared his gun, but had to dive aside as the stranger's Colt swung his way. The men with Colton went for their weapons, and the air filled with gun smoke and thunder. But the stranger was already moving, rolling behind a water trough as bullets splintered the wood where he'd been standing. Clara scrambled on hands and knees toward the sidewalk, her ears ringing from the gunfire. Through the chaos, she heard the stranger's voice, calm as a man discussing the weather. Might want to reconsider this path. Colton. Won't end well for you. Colton had taken cover behind a post, his pearl-handled revolver spitting fire. Kill him, all of you! Kill him now! But something had shifted in the dynamics of the street. The townspeople, emboldened by the stranger's stand, were no longer hiding. Windows opened wider. A few men emerged from doorways, not joining the fight but no longer running from it either. And in that moment, as bullets flew and her fate hung in the balance, Clara Mayfield realized that sometimes courage was contagious. Sometimes all it took was one person willing to say no to change everything. The stranger's gun spoke again, precise and deadly, and another of Colton's men went down. The kingdom Ray Colton had built on fear was facing its first real challenge, and Clara had a feeling this was only the beginning. The gunfire died as suddenly as it had begun. Colton's men, seeing 2 of their number down and facing a marksman who moved like he'd been born with iron in his hands, had lost their appetite for the fight. They dragged their wounded companions back toward the saloon, leaving Colton exposed behind his post. "This isn't over," Colton snarled, but he was already backing toward the Lucky Spur's doors. "You just signed your death warrant, stranger." The man in the brown duster stood slowly, both guns still drawn but pointed at the ground. "Name's Barrett," he said, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "Colt Barrett, and I'll be around if you want to collect on that warrant." Colton's face went through several shades of red before he finally retreated into his saloon, the bat-wing doors swinging shut behind him like the final note of a deadly song. Clara pushed herself up from the dusty boardwalk, her hands shaking slightly as the adrenaline began to fade. Her dress was further torn, her hair a wild tangle, but she was alive and unharmed. She watched as Colt Barrett, she had a name now for her mysterious rescuer, calmly reloaded his weapons before holstering them. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "You hurt any—" "No, Clara's voice came out as a croak. She cleared her throat and tried again. "No, thanks to you, Mr. Barrett, was it?" He nodded, those gray eyes scanning the street. Some townspeople had emerged fully now, whispering among themselves, but none approached. The two wounded gunmen had been dragged inside the saloon, leaving only bloodstains in the dust as evidence of the confrontation. "You should get somewhere safe," Colt said. "Colton's not the type to forgive and forget." Clara straightened her spine, some of her schoolteacher bearing returning despite her disheveled appearance. "I have nowhere else to go. I board at Mrs. Finch's, but she'll throw me out before she risks Colton's anger. That's how it works in this town, Cross Ray Colton. And you might as well be a ghost." Colt studied her for a moment, and Clara had the uncomfortable feeling he was seeing more than she intended to show. There was something in his gaze, a weariness that spoke of too many battles fought and too few won. "Why'd you do it?" he asked finally. "Stand up to him. Must have known how it would go." Clara lifted her chin. "Because someone had to. He's been stealing from the school fund for months. The children need books, slates, proper supplies. Half of them come to school with barely enough to eat, and he's taking what little money was meant to help them. I couldn't stay quiet." A ghost of what might have been a smile crossed Colt's weathered features. "World needs more teachers with backbone. And apparently more cowboys who aren't afraid of Ray Colton," Clara replied. "Though I have to ask, why did you intervene? You don't know me. This isn't your fight." Colt was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old memories. "Maybe I'm tired of watching bad men drag good people around. Maybe I've seen enough of that for one lifetime." Before Clara could respond, Sheriff Briggs finally decided to make an appearance, approaching with the caution of a man walking through a nest of rattlers. His badge caught the last rays of sunlight, a mockery of what it was supposed to represent. "Now, folks," Briggs began, his voice artificially jovial, "let's all just calm down. Been a misunderstanding is all. Mr. Barrett, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." "On what charge?" Colt asked mildly. "Disturbing the peace. Assault." "Self-defense," Clara interrupted hotly. "This man saved me from being kidnapped. If you were any kind of lawman, Sheriff Briggs, you'd be arresting Ray Colton's thugs, not—" "Miss Mayfield," Briggs cut her off, his false friendliness evaporating. "You do well to remember that making false accusations is a serious matter. Mr. Colton is a respected businessman in this community." "Respected?" Clara's green eyes flashed. "He rules through fear and bribes, and everyone knows it." Colt raised a hand slightly, a calming gesture. "Sheriff, I'll make this simple. I'm not going anywhere with you. Those men drew first plenty of witnesses to that. Now, you can try to take me in, but we both know how that'll end. Or you can walk away and tell Colton the situation's too hot right now. Your choice." Briggs' face went through several interesting contortions as he processed his options. The sheriff was a coward at heart. Clara knew. which was precisely why Colton had wanted him in the position. He'd backed down from any real confrontation. This isn't over," Briggs finally managed, unconsciously echoing his master's words. "You can't just ride into town and—" "Already did," Colt observed. "Question now is what comes next." The sheriff retreated, muttering under his breath, and Clara found herself alone on the street with the mysterious Colt Barrett. The sun had nearly set, painting everything in deep purples and blues. Lanterns were being lit in windows, casting golden squares of light onto the darkening street. "You really don't have anywhere safe to go?" Colt asked. Clara shook her head. "I've made myself a pariah. Even people who privately agree with me about Colton won't risk helping me now." She tried to keep the bitterness from her voice and mostly failed. "That's the power of fear, Mr. Barrett. It makes cowards of good people." Colt seemed to come to a decision. "I've got a place outside town. Nothing fancy, but it's secure. You can stay there tonight. Figure out your next move come morning." "I couldn't possibly—" "Ma'am, in about 10 minutes, Colton's going to send men to wherever you've been staying. They won't find you. They'll come looking. You want to be standing here when they do?" The logic was unassailable, but Clara hesitated. She didn't know this man, had never seen him before today, yet he'd risked his life for her, a complete stranger, when no one else would lift a finger. "Why?" she asked again. "Why help me?" Colt's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Had a sister once, about your age when—" He trailed off, then shook his head. "Doesn't matter now. Point is, I couldn't help her. Maybe I can help you." The pain in those simple words decided her. Whatever had happened to his sister, it had left a mark on Colt Barrett's soul. She recognized the look she'd seen it in her own mirror after her mother died. "All right," she said. "And thank you." He nodded and whistled sharply. The black stallion, which had stood calmly throughout the gunfight like it was used to such chaos, trotted over. Colt swung up into the saddle with practiced ease, then extended a hand to Clara. "Can you ride?" "I can manage." Clara had learned out of necessity, teaching at a school that served families scattered across miles of prairie. She took his hand, noting the calluses and strength there, and allowed him to pull her up behind him. "Hold on," he advised, and Clara wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through the duster coat. He smelled of leather and gunpowder, tobacco and something else sage, maybe, or juniper. They rode out of Cedar Hollow as darkness claimed the town, the Lucky Spur's lights falling away behind them. Clara glanced back once and saw figures spilling out of the saloon, no doubt Colton's men beginning their search for her. She tightened her grip on Colt and faced forward, into the unknown. The trail south led through rolling hills dotted with scrub brush and the occasional pine. The moon hadn't risen yet, but Colt's horse seemed to know the way, picking a path through the darkness with sure-footed confidence. They rode in silence for perhaps 20 minutes before Colt spoke. "You mentioned proof about Colton stealing." "I saw the ledgers," Clara said, having to speak close to his ear to be heard over the sound of hooves. "He keeps 2 sets of books, one for show, one real. I was in the mayor's office after hours, trying to get him to listen to the parents' complaints. When I saw them on Colton's desk, the mayor lets him use the back room for his business meetings. You get a good look. Good enough. The real books showed hundreds of dollars meant for the school going into something called the Lucky Account. I'd bet my last dollar that's Colton's personal fund." Colt made a thoughtful sound. "Dangerous knowledge to have." "Which is why he wanted to silence me." Clara shivered slightly as the evening air cooled. "I should have been smarter about it, gathered more evidence before confronting him. But when I saw the children trying to share broken slates, making do with books so old the pages fell out, I lost my temper." "Nothing wrong with righteous anger," Colt said. "Sometimes it's the only thing that gets things done." They created a rise, and Clara could see a small valley below, sheltered by hills on 3 sides, A stream glinted like silver thread in the starlight, and near it sat a modest cabin with a thin trail of smoke rising from its chimney. It looked solid, built to last, but had an air of solitude about it that matched its owner. "Home," Colt said simply, as they descended into the valley. Clara noticed the strategic position anyone approaching would be visible long before they reached the cabin, and the hills provided natural protection. This was the home of a man who valued security, who'd learned to watch his back. A dog's bark greeted them as they approached, and a shaggy form emerged from the shadows, a large mixed breed with intelligent eyes and graying muzzle. "Easy, Buck," Colt called, and the dog's tail began wagging. "We've got company." He helped Clara down from the horse, and she stood uncertainly while he tended to the animal, removing saddle and tack with efficient movements. Buck sniffed at her skirts curiously, but seemed to accept her presence. "He doesn't usually take to strangers," Colt observed, hanging the saddle on a rail. "Must sense you're good people." "Or he's just hoping I have food," Clara said, tentatively patting the dog's head. Buck leaned into her touch, tail wagging harder. "There's that too," Colt agreed, and Clara caught what might have been amusement in his tone. "Come on, let's get you inside. Air's got a bite to it tonight." The cabin's interior was exactly what Clara had expected, sparse but clean, everything in its place. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a coffee pot and Dutch oven nearby. A simple table and 2 chairs, a shelf with a few books, a narrow bed in the corner, bachelor quarters, but well-maintained. "It's not much," Colt said, lighting a lantern. The warm glow pushed back the shadows, revealing more details: a rifle mounted above the fireplace, a guitar in the corner, curtains that suggested a woman's touch at some point in the past. "It's perfect," Clara said sincerely. "After what happened today, I'm just grateful for a safe place." Colt moved to the fireplace, adding wood to the dying embers. "You hungry? Got some stew from yesterday that's still good?" Clara's stomach reminded her she'd missed supper in all the chaos. "That would be wonderful. Thank you." As he busied himself with the food, Clara studied her rescuer more closely. Without his hat, she could see his hair was dark brown with a few premature silver threads at the temples. The scar she'd noticed earlier was more prominent in the lantern light, and there were other marks: a man who'd lived hard and survived harder. "You were a soldier," she said. It wasn't a question. Colt glanced at her as he ladled stew into bowls. "Once upon a time, Union cavalry, rode with Sheridan in the Shenandoah Valley." "And after the war?" His movement stilled for just a moment. "Different kinds of battles, not all of them mine." He brought her a bowl and spoon. "What about you? How does a schoolteacher end up taking on the most dangerous man in Wyoming territory?" Clara tasted the stew venison with vegetables. Simple but good. "My mother was a teacher back in Ohio. When she died, I had nothing keeping me there, so I came west. Thought I could make a difference." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Shows what I know." "You stood up when no one else would," Colt said, taking the other chair. "That makes a difference, whether you see it yet or not." They ate in companionable silence for a while, Buck settling by the fire with a contented sigh. Clara felt the tension of the day slowly easing from her shoulders. She was safe, for now at least. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she had shelter and an ally. "I should warn you," Colt said eventually. "Colton won't let this go. He can't afford to. Man like him rules through fear, and today that fear got cracked. He'll come after both of us now." "I know." Clara met his steady gaze. "I'm sorry I've dragged you into this." "You didn't drag me anywhere. I made my choice." He stood, collecting their empty bowls. "Been making the safe choice for too long anyway. Maybe it's time that changed." As he washed the dishes in a bucket by the door, Clara wondered what had driven this man to isolate himself in this valley. What battles he'd mentioned that weren't his own. His sister, obviously, but there was more to the story. The guitar in the corner, the curtain signs of a life that had held more than solitude. "You can have the bed," Colt said, interrupting her thoughts. "I'll take the floor by the fire." "I couldn't." "Non-negotiable." His tone was firm, but not unkind. "My mother would rise from her grave and box my ears if I let a lady sleep on the floor." Despite everything, Clara found herself smiling. "Your mother sounds like she was a formidable woman." "That she was?" A genuine warmth entered Colt's voice. "Raised 3 boys mostly on her own after Pa died. Taught us right from wrong and made sure the lessons stuck. She'd be proud of what you did today." Colt's expression shuddered slightly. "Maybe. There's blankets in the chest at the foot of the bed. We'll figure out what to do about Colton come morning." Clara recognized the dismissal and didn't push. She was a guest here, and Colt Barrett had already done more for her than she had any right to expect. But as she prepared for bed, listening to him settling by the fire, she couldn't shake the feeling that their meeting hadn't been mere chance. 2 damaged souls, perhaps drawn together by circumstance and a shared unwillingness to bow to tyranny. Whatever tomorrow brought, Clara knew her life had taken an irrevocable turn the moment Colt Barrett had ridden down that dusty street and chosen to make her fight his own. The Lucky Spur Saloon was in full swing by 9 o'clock. Smoke hung thick as morning fog, mixing with the scent of whiskey, sweat, and cheap perfume. The piano player hammered out a lively tune while painted ladies circulated among the tables, their laughter bright and false as fool's gold. Miners, cowboys, and drifters crowded the bar, trying to wash away the dust and disappointments of another day. Colt Barrett pushed through the bat-wing doors like a man walking into church calm, purposeful, and ready for whatever salvation or damnation awaited. The music stuttered to a halt. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every eye in the place swiveled to the tall figure in the brown duster who'd humiliated Ray Colton just hours before. Behind Colt, Clara Mayfield followed, her chin high despite the fear coursing through her veins. She'd argued against coming back, but Colt had been adamant. "Running makes you pray. We face him now, on our terms." She'd changed into a clean dress he'd somehow procured simple gray wool that belonged to whoever had left those curtains in his cabin, and her hair was pinned back severely. She looked like what she was a schoolteacher prepared for battle. Ray Colton sat at his private table in the back corner, playing poker with 3 men Clara recognized as wealthy ranchers from the valley. The saloon owner's eyes glittered with malice as he watched them approach, but his hands never paused in their dealing of cards. Well, Colton's cultured voice carried easily through the tense silence. "The prodigal schoolmarm returns, and she's brought her guard dog." Several of Colton's men shifted positions, hands drifting toward weapons. Colt seemed not to notice, though Clara saw how his duster was pushed back, leaving easy access to both his guns. "We need to talk," Colt said simply. "Do we?" Colton examined his cards with theatrical interest. "I'm in the middle of a game. Mr. Barrett, whatever you have to say can wait." "No." Colt's voice carried the finality of a judge's gavel. "It can't." The ranchers at Colton's table exchanged nervous glances. One, a heavy-set man named Hutchins, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should continue this another time." Ray. "Sit!" Colton's command cracked like a whip. "Nobody leaves this table until I say so." Colt moved closer, his spurs ringing in the silence. Clara stayed slightly behind him, fighting the urge to flee. The saloon felt like a powder keg, one spark away from explosion. "The lady has something that belongs to you," Colt said. "Information about certain financial irregularities, information that could cause you considerable trouble if it reached the wrong ears." Colton's perfectly waxed mustache twitched. "Is that so? And what does the lady want in exchange for this information?" "Her life." Clara spoke up, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "And the lives of the children you've been stealing from." Such dramatic language. Colton laid down his cards, a full house. Clara noticed. I'm a businessman, Miss Mayfield. I invest in this community. The fact that you don't understand commerce doesn't make me a thief. 2 sets of books makes you a thief. Clara shot back. Money marked for education going into your lucky account makes you a thief. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Colton's mask of civility slipped, revealing something cold and reptilian beneath. You broke into my office. That's a serious crime. The mayor's office? Clara corrected. Public property. And the door was open. Technicalities. Colton stood slowly, and Clara was reminded that despite his refined appearance, he was a dangerous man. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me exactly what you saw, who you've told, and then you're going to leave Cedar Hollow. Tonight. Forever. No. The simple refusal hung in the air. Colton blinked, as if he couldn't quite process the word. No, he repeated. The lady's not going anywhere. Colt said. And neither is the money you stole. You're going to return every cent to the school fund. Tonight. Colton laughed a sound like breaking glass. You must be joking. Do I look like I'm joking? Indeed. Colt Barrett looked about as far from joking as a man could get. He stood relaxed but ready, like a coiled spring waiting for release. Clara had seen that stance once before, when a rabid wolf had threatened her students during a recess. The local hunter who'd shot it had the same deadly calm. Even if I wanted to, Colton said slowly, which I don't. That money's already been allocated investments, you understand, the price of progress. Then unallocated. Colt suggested, sell something. That fancy watch you're wearing should cover a few reading primers. Colton's hand moved unconsciously to the gold watch chain across his vest. You're insane, both of you. Do you have any idea who I am? What I can do? Yeah, Colt replied. You're a small man with a big hat who thinks money makes him untouchable. I've known a dozen like you. They all thought they were untouchable too. They were wrong. The threat implicit in those words wasn't lost on anyone. One of Colton's men, the one called Murdoch with his arm in a sling from the earlier gunfight, stepped forward. Boss, just say the word. And what? Colt asked mildly. Start a gunfight in a room full of witnesses, kill a schoolteacher in front of half the town. That'll go over real well with the territorial governor. The governor's 100 miles away. Colton sneered. Telegraph wires right down the street, Clara added. I already sent word to the Territorial Education Board about the missing funds. They'll be sending an inspector within the week. It was a lie, but a plausible one. Clara saw uncertainty flicker across Colton's face. He was used to operating in the shadows, using intimidation and violence carefully, strategically. Open murder in his own establishment would be bad for business. You're bluffing, he said finally. Clara reached into her pocket and withdrew a folded paper. Copy of the telegram. Would you like to read it? She'd actually copied out a lesson plan, but in the dim light, Colton couldn't tell. His jaw worked as he processed this development. Get out, he said finally. Both of you, get out of my establishment. Not until you agree to return the money. Colt said, or what you'll shoot up my saloon, kill all my men. Colton gestured broadly. Look around. Barrett, you're outnumbered 10-1. Numbers don't matter much in close quarters. Colt observed. And your men know I'll take you first. Hard to spend their wages when their boss is breathing through a new hole. The crowd of patrons had pressed back against the walls, giving the confrontation wide berth. Clara noticed several had quietly slipped out, no doubt spreading word of the showdown through town. By morning, everyone would know that someone had finally stood up to Ray Colton. That's when she understood Colt's strategy. This wasn't about winning a gunfight. It was about breaking Colton's aura of invincibility. Every moment they stood here defying him, every word that challenged his authority, chipped away at the fear that gave him power. Mister, "Colton," she said, stepping beside Colt. "You're a businessman. Let's discuss this like civilized people. You return the education funds. We forget about the telegram to the authorities. Everyone wins." "Except I'm out several $1,000s," Colton said dryly. "Consider it an investment in community goodwill," Clara suggested. "After all, a town with educated children grows more prosperous. More prosperity means more money flowing through the lucky spur. Long-term thinking, Mr. Colton." She saw him wavering. For all his villainy, Ray Colton was indeed a businessman. He understood profit and loss, risk and reward. Fighting might satisfy his pride, but it wouldn't fill his coffers. "Even if I agreed," he said carefully. "And I'm not saying I am. How do I know you won't simply make more accusations? Send more telegrams?" "My word," Clara said. Colton snorted. "The word of a woman who broke into my office." "The word of a teacher who cares about her students," Clara corrected. "All I've ever wanted was for those children to have the education they deserve. Give me that, and I have no quarrel with you." "And him," Colton jerked his chin at Colt. "What's his stake in this?" "I don't like bullies," Colt said simply. "Never have. You leave the lady alone. Stop stealing from children, and I'll have no reason to darken your door again." Colton was quiet for a long moment, calculating. The silence stretched like taffy, sticky and uncomfortable. Finally, he reached into his vest and withdrew a leather wallet. "How much?" he asked grudgingly. $847, Clara said promptly. "That's what's missing from the last 6 months of education funds." Colton counted out bills with the expression of a man pulling his own teeth. The money piled up on the poker table. More cash than Clara had ever seen in one place. When he finished, he pushed it toward her with obvious reluctance. "Take it and get out, both of you. And if I see either of you in here again—" "You won't," Colt assured him. "Unless you give us reason." Clara scooped up the money with trembling hands, hardly believing what had just happened. They'd walked into the lion's den and emerged not just alive, but victorious. It seemed impossible. As they turned to leave, Colton's voice stopped them. "This isn't over. Barrett, you've made an enemy today. I have a long memory." Colt looked back over his shoulder. "So do I." They walked through the silent saloon, the crowd parting before them like the Red Sea. Clara felt the weight of dozens of eyes, some hostile, some admiring, most simply shocked. The batwing doors swung shut behind them with a sound like applause. Outside, the night air hit Clara like a splash of cold water. Her knees suddenly felt weak, and she had to grab Colt's arm to steady herself. "I can't believe we just did that," she breathed. "Yeah, you did well in there," Colt said, cool as Winter Creek water. "I was terrified every second. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what needs doing, despite the fear." He guided her toward where he'd hitched his horse. "Come on, let's get that money somewhere safe before Colton changes his mind." As they mounted up, Clara clutched the bundle of cash against her chest like a talisman. $800. Enough for books, slates, pencils, maybe even a new stove for winter. The children would have what they needed. "Thank you," she said softly against Colt's back as they rode. "I couldn't have done this without you." "Sure you could have," he replied. "Just might have taken longer." But Clara heard the warmth in his voice, the hint of admiration. They'd walked into the heart of danger and emerged victorious. But she knew Colton had spoken true. This wasn't over. Men like him didn't forget humiliation. As they rode through the darkness toward Colt's cabin, Clara wondered what price they'd eventually pay for tonight's victory. But with the money safe in her hands and a brave man at her side, she found she didn't care. Some things were worth the risk. The children would have their books, and Ray Colton had learned that his reign of fear could be challenged. It was a good night's work, even if it was just the beginning of a larger fight. Behind them, the lights of the Lucky Spur glowed like angry eyes in the darkness. and Clara shivered despite the warmth of Colt's solid presence. The real storm was yet to come. The morning sun painted Colt's valley in shades of gold and green as Clara sat on the porch, counting the recovered money for the third time, $847. She still couldn't quite believe it was real. Inside the cabin, she could hear Colt moving about, preparing breakfast. The domestic sounds were oddly comforting after the tension of the previous night. Buck lay at her feet, tail thumping occasionally against the wooden boards. The old dog had taken to following her around like a shadow, as if sensing she needed protection. Clara reached down to scratch behind his ears, earning a contented groan. "Coffee's ready," Colt called from inside. Clara carefully tucked the money into the leather satchel Colt had given her and went inside. He was standing by the stove, looking remarkably at ease in his domestic role, without his guns and duster. In just a simple blue shirt and dark trousers, he seemed younger, less dangerous, but Clara had learned not to be fooled by appearances. "Sleep well?" he asked, handing her a steaming cup. "Better than I expected." Clara admitted. The coffee was strong and black, exactly what she needed. "Though I kept thinking I heard horses in the night." "You did." Colt poured his own cup and leaned against the wall. "3 riders, around midnight. They stayed on the ridge for about 20 minutes, then left." Clara's stomach tightened. "Colton's men, most likely scouting, seeing where you went." He must have seen her fear because he added, "They won't try anything here. Too exposed coming down into the valley, and they know I'll see them coming." "But I can't stay here forever," Clara said, voicing what they both knew. "I have to get back to town, to the school, the children." "We'll figure it out," Colt interrupted gently. "First, eat something. Can't think straight on an empty stomach." He served up fried eggs, bacon, and biscuits with a competence that suggested years of bachelor cooking. They ate in companionable silence. But Clara's mind was racing. She had the money, but how could she use it if she couldn't safely return to town? "Tell me about your sister," she said suddenly, surprising herself with the question. Colt's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He set it down slowly, his gray eyes going distant. "What makes you think?" "You mentioned her yesterday. Said she was about my age when something happened." Clara kept her voice gentle. "You don't have to tell me. I just thought, we're trusting each other with our lives. Maybe we should know who we're trusting." Colt was quiet for so long, Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then he stood, moving to the window that looked out over the valley. Her name was Sarah, 2 years younger than me. Sweet as spring honey and twice as golden, took after our mother that way. Clara waited, sensing the weight of the story about to unfold. "This was back in Missouri, before the war. I was working as a deputy marshal in Jefferson City. Good job, steady pay. I was even courting a girl, Elizabeth Hawthorne, banker's daughter." A bitter smile twisted his lips. "Thought I had life all figured out at 25. He took a sip of coffee, gathering himself. Sarah had caught the eye of a local businessman, Theodore Mansfield, rich, powerful, used to getting what he wanted. Sarah wasn't interested. She was engaged to a farm boy named Tom, but Mansfield didn't take rejection well. Clara's hands tightened on her cup, already sensing where this was heading. One night, Mansfield and his boys grabbed Sarah outside the church social. Tom tried to stop them, got a bullet for his trouble. They took her to Mansfield's house. Colt's voice went flat, emotionless. By the time I got there, it was too late. She'd fought them, fought hard, too hard. She was dying when I kicked down the door. "Oh, Colt," Clara breathed. "I killed 2 of Mansfield's men that night. Would have killed him too, but he'd already fled. Took Sarah home, held her hand while she—" He cleared his throat. "She died just before dawn. Last thing she said was, 'Don't let him win.'" The cabin fell silent except for the crackling of wood in the stove. Clara wanted to go to him, offer comfort, but sensed he needed to finish the story. I went after Mansfield legal-like. Had witnesses, evidence. Didn't matter. He owned the judge, the mayor, half the town council. They turned it around. Said I'd murdered his men in cold blood. That Sarah had been at his house willingly. Elizabeth, my girl. Her father forbade her to see me. Said I was a killer. Unstable. She married Mansfield 6 months later. Clara gasped. She married him after what he did. Money talks louder than truth sometimes. Colt turned from the window, his face carved from stone. They ran me out of town, stripped my badge. I joined the army after that. Figured if I was going to be called a killer, might as well make it official. Been drifting ever since the war ended. Keeping to myself, staying out of other people's fights. Until yesterday, Clara said softly. Until yesterday. He met her eyes. When I saw them dragging you down that street, all I could see was Sarah. Couldn't let it happen again. Couldn't stand by and do nothing. Clara rose from her chair and crossed to him. Without thinking, she placed her hand on his arm. I'm sorry. About Sarah. About all of it. But I'm grateful too. You saved me. Colt, you gave me a chance to fight back. He looked down at her hand on his arm. Something shifting in his expression. Sarah would have liked you, same kind of steel underneath. Before Clara could respond, Buck suddenly started barking. Colt moved instantly, grabbing his gun belt from the hook by the door. Someone's coming. Clara's heart leaped into her throat, but Colt peered out the window and relaxed slightly. Just one rider. Looks like Elijah. Clara recognized the name the blacksmith Colt had mentioned, the one who'd lost his arm to Colton's violence. She watched as a stocky man on a gray mare descended into the valley. Even from a distance, she could see how he held the reins awkwardly with his remaining hand. Colt stepped out onto the porch, hand resting casually on his gun. Elijah, bit early for a social call. The blacksmith reined up near the cabin. He was older than Clara had expected, maybe 50, with iron-gray hair and a face weathered by forge fire and hardship. His right arm ended just below the elbow, the sleeve pinned up neatly. Colt. Elijah nodded, then touched his hat brim to Clara. Ma'am, heard about the excitement in town last night. News travels fast, Colt observed. Faster when Ray Colton's involved. Elijah dismounted carefully. That's why I'm here. Thought you should know Colton's been recruiting. Sent telegrams to Cheyenne, calling in favors. Word is he's bringing in professional guns. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. Professional killers. The kind that make their living ending other folks' lives. Elijah confirmed grimly. 3 of them, supposedly, due on tomorrow's train. Colt's expression didn't change, but Clara saw his hand tighten slightly on his gun butt. Know any names? 1, Jack Thornton. They call him 3-Jack on account of he always carries 3 pistols. I've heard of him, Colt said quietly. Out of Texas, back shooter and woman killer, but fast, very fast. The other 2 are brothers, Elijah continued. The Wheelers. Don't know much about them except they left a trail of bodies from Kansas to Colorado. Clara sank down onto the porch step. The weight of this news crushing. 3 professional killers. Because of me. Because of Colton. Colt corrected firmly. This is his choice, his escalation. He studied Elijah. Why ride out here to warn us, Colton, know you're here? The blacksmith's weathered face hardened. Lost my arm because I wouldn't shoe his horses on credit. Lost my shop because I couldn't work fast enough with one hand. Lost my wife because she couldn't stand to see me beaten down. He straightened his shoulders. I got nothing left to lose, Barrett. But maybe I got a chance to see that bastard finally pay. This isn't your fight, Colt said. Hell it ain't. Elijah's voice carried years of suppressed rage. Every person in Cedar Hollow who's been ground under Colton's boot. It's their fight. We've just been too scared to take it. But what you did last night, making him back down. He shook his head. First time in 3 years anyone's seen Ray Colton blink. Clara stood up, an idea forming. How many others feel like you do, Mr. Elijah? The blacksmith considered. Plenty. I'd wager. Tom Hutchins at the general store, Colton's been bleeding him dry with protection fees. Doc Brennan's had to patch up too many of Colton's victims. The widow Martinez, whose son got beat near to death for looking sideways at one of Colton's girls. Maybe a dozen others who've suffered personal losses. But they're all too afraid to act, Colt said. We're afraid, Elijah corrected. But fear's like a dam. Once it cracks, the whole thing can come down mighty fast. Clara looked between the two men. What if we didn't wait for Colton's hired guns? What if we took the fight to him first? You're talking about war, Colt said quietly. I'm talking about justice. Clara's mind was racing. We have the evidence of his theft. We have people who've been wronged. If we could organize them, present a united front. Colton owns the sheriff, the mayor. But he doesn't own the territorial marshal. Clara interrupted. If enough citizens demand an investigation, if we can document the crimes, show a pattern of corruption. Elijah nodded slowly. She's got a point. One person complaining is a troublemaker. 20 people complaining is a movement. Colt was quiet, considering. Clara could almost see him weighing options, calculating odds. Finally, he spoke. We'd need to move fast before those guns arrive. Tonight. You're actually considering this? Clara asked, hope rising in her chest. Colton's not going to stop. Colt said simply, he can't afford to let our defiance stand, so either we run and keep running, or we finish this. And I'm tired of running. I can gather folks. Elijah offered. Quiet like. Meet at my old shop after dark. It's been empty since Colton drove me out. But I still have the key. Dangerous, Colt warned. Anyone Colton suspects of joining us? Like I said. Elijah's jaw set stubbornly. Nothing left to lose, but maybe something to gain. My self-respect, if nothing else. Clara felt a surge of admiration for the broken blacksmith who refused to stay broken. Tell them about the school money. Tell them we got it back. Show them Colton can be beaten. I'll do that. Elijah remounted with some difficulty. After dark then, the old forge on Mill Street. He looked down at them. Time was. I could swing a hammer all day and night. Now I can barely hold a horse's reins. But I can still fight. Barrett, we all can. In our way. As he rode off, Clara turned to Colt. Do you really think we can do this, take on Colton with a bunch of shopkeepers and scared citizens? Depends, Colt said, watching Elijah disappear over the ridge. Not on how well they fight, but on how much they want to be free. A man fighting for his home, his family, his dignity that's worth 10 hired guns fighting for wages. And what are you fighting for? Clara asked softly. Colt looked at her, and for a moment his careful guard dropped. Maybe for the chance to stop running, to plant my feet somewhere and say, this is where I make my stand. He paused. Maybe for you. The words hung between them, charged with possibility. Clara felt her cheeks warm, but before she could respond, Colt had turned away. We should prepare, he said, his voice businesslike again. If we're doing this, we'll need a plan, and you'll need to learn to shoot better than what I saw yesterday. I thought I did rather well for a school teacher. Clara protested, grateful for the change of subject, even as her heart still raced from his admission. You did. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. But rather well won't cut it if lead starts flying tonight. Come on, let's see what we can do about your aim. As Clara followed him to the makeshift shooting range he'd set up behind the cabin, she thought about the unlikely army they were assembling. A one-armed blacksmith, a schoolteacher, a haunted ex-soldier, and whoever else found courage enough to stand with them. David had faced Goliath with less. The sun climbed higher, marking the hours until nightfall, until their ragtag rebellion would begin, win or lose. By tomorrow, Cedar Hollow would be forever changed. And so, Clara realized, would she? The old forge on Mill Street stood like a wounded soldier in the darkness, its broken windows catching the moonlight like empty eyes. Clara pulled her shawl tighter as she and Colt approached through the alley, every shadow seeming to hide potential danger. The sound of hushed voices drifted from within, telling them others had already arrived. "Remember," Colt murmured, his hand resting lightly on her elbow. "If this goes bad, you run, no arguments." "We've been through this," Clara whispered back. "I'm not leaving." He sighed, but didn't press the issue. They'd spent the afternoon planning, and practicing Clara's marksmanship had improved considerably, though she prayed she wouldn't need to use it. More importantly, they'd refined their strategy. Evidence first, violence only as a last resort. Elijah met them at the side door, his weathered face grim but determined. 12 showed up, more than I expected, less than we need. Inside, the forge still smelled of coal and metal despite months of abandonment. A single lantern cast dancing shadows on the walls, illuminating a small group of Cedar Hollow's citizens. Clara recognized most of them Tom Hutchins from the general store, his face drawn with worry. Dr. Brennan, medical bag at his feet as always, the widow Martinez, her dark eyes burning with long-suppressed fury. Samuel Chen, who ran the laundry and had been beaten twice for refusing to pay higher protection fees. "Friends," Clara began, stepping into the circle of light. "Thank you for coming. I know the risk you're taking." "Risk?" The widow Martinez spat the word like a curse. "What risk can Colton kill my Miguel twice? Can he take more than everything?" She looked around the group fiercely. "I have prayed for 3 years for justice. Perhaps God sends it in strange packages." A murmur of agreement rippled through the gathering. Clara felt Colt's presence behind her, solid and reassuring. As she continued, "You all know what happened last night. We forced Colton to return the stolen school funds, but that's just the beginning. He's bringing in hired killers. If we don't act now—" "What can we do?" Tom Hutchins interrupted, wringing his hands. "We're not gunfighters. I sell flour and beans, for heaven's sake." "You sell more than that." Colt spoke up, his voice carrying quiet authority. "You sell community. Every time you extend credit to a family in need, every time you share news and gossip over your counter, you're building something Colton can't touch with all his guns and money." Pretty words. Another man said Clara recognized him as Bill Foster, who ran the livery stable. "But bullets punch through pretty words real easy." "Then we don't give him a chance to use bullets." Clara said, "Mr. Chen, you wash clothes for half the town, including Colton's fancy shirts. What have you seen? What have you heard?" The elderly Chinese man stepped forward hesitantly. His English was accented but clear. "Many things. Blood on clothes that is not his. Papers in pockets, IOUs. Threats. One time letter about bringing opium through town." "Opium, doctor." Brennan's head snapped up. "That explains some things. I've treated several men for addiction. Wondered where they were getting it." "My husband kept records," the widow Martinez added suddenly. "Before Colton had him killed. Lists of businesses being extorted, amounts paid. I still have them." "I've got documentation too," Tom Hutchins admitted reluctantly. "Every payment I've made, every threat. Been keeping it in case someday—" He trailed off, then straightened his shoulders. "In case someday someone was brave enough to use it." Clara felt a surge of hope. "This is what we need. Evidence, testimony. If we can document everything, create a clear picture of Colton's crimes—" "And send it where?" Foster demanded. "Sheriff Briggs tears up any complaint against Colton. Mayor's in his pocket deeper than lint." "The territorial marshal in Cheyenne." Clara said, "And the newspapers, the governor, make it too big to ignore, too public to suppress." "She's right, Doctor," Brennan said slowly. "Medical records alone would show a pattern of violence. I've been keeping notes on every beating, every accident that wasn't. We compile everything tonight, Colt said, taking charge with natural authority. Every document, every testimony. Miss Mayfield writes it up proper, she's got the education for it. Come morning, we send copies to every authority we can think of. What about Colton's killers? Someone asked. They arrive tomorrow. Let them come, Colt said grimly. To an empty town if we're smart. Everyone who's willing leaves for the day. Hunting trip, visiting relatives, whatever excuse works. No targets, no witnesses. You mean run? Foster's voice dripped skepticism. I mean survive, Colt corrected. Dead martyrs can't testify. We're not trying to win a gunfight, we're trying to win a war. Different tactics. What about those who can't leave, Mrs.? Peterson spoke up. Clara hadn't noticed the elderly seamstress in the shadows. I've got nowhere to go, no relatives to visit. The church, the widow Martinez suggested. Father Miguel will give sanctuary. Colton won't violate it. Bad for business to shoot up a house of God. Don't bet on it, Colt warned. But Clara could see the plan taking shape. For the next hour, they worked with desperate efficiency. People produced hidden documents, whispered testimonies that Dr. Brennan transcribed in his medical shorthand. The widow Martinez sent her eldest son to fetch the records from their hiding place. Tom Hutchins detailed every extortion payment, his merchant's memory precise with amounts and dates. Clara found herself at the center of it all, organizing the evidence, helping people frame their stories in legal terms she'd learned from her teacher mother's law books. Colt stood guard by the door, ever watchful, while Buck, who'd insisted on coming, lay alert at his feet. This is good, Clara said finally, looking at the pile of documentation. This shows systematic extortion, violence, possibly murder. No honest lawman could ignore this. The question is whether we'll live long enough to send it, Elijah said grimly. That's where I come in, a new voice said from the doorway. Everyone spun, hands reaching for weapons they mostly didn't have. But the figure stepping into the light was unexpected. Father Miguel, the Mexican priest who tended the small Catholic church on the edge of town. Father, the widow Martinez crossed herself. You should not be here. Where else should a shepherd be when his flock is threatened? The priest was younger than Clara had expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes that held surprising steel. I've been waiting 3 years for this town to find its courage. I won't stand aside now. Colton leaves the church alone, Colt observed carefully. Because I've been careful not to challenge him directly. But I too have records. Confessions I cannot break, but patterns I can share. Young women who came to me after visits to the Lucky Spur they don't remember. Men dying from beatings who wanted last rites. His face hardened. Evil flourishes when good people do nothing. I'm done doing nothing. You could lose everything, Clara warned. Better to lose everything standing than keep it kneeling. Father Miguel replied, Now, I believe you need a safe place to complete this work. The church has a basement, stone walls, one entrance, easier to defend than this glass house. Colt and Clara exchanged glances. It made tactical sense, but it also raised the stakes. Using the church as a fortress would draw clear battle lines. We're past the point of subtlety anyway, Colt said, reading her thoughts. All right, Father, we accept your offer. The move took another hour, people slipping through the dark streets in ones and twos, carrying their precious documents. Clara noticed how they moved differently now, still afraid, but with purpose. Fear remained, but it no longer paralyzed. The church basement proved ideal: stone walls, heavy door, narrow windows near the ceiling for light but too small for entry. Father Miguel had already prepared, bringing down tables, chairs, oil lamps, even food and water. You've been planning this, Clara accused gently. Praying for it, he corrected. There's a difference. As the night wore on, their conspiracy grew. Others arrived, drawn by whispered words and newfound hope. the baker's wife, whose daughter had disappeared after catching Colton's eye, the telegraph operator, who'd been forced to destroy messages that might have brought help, even Mrs. Finch, Clara's former landlady, crept in near midnight. "Threw you out to save my own skin," she admitted, not meeting Clara's eyes. "Been sick about it ever since. If there's a way to make it right." "There is," Clara assured her. "Your boarding house records, do they show any of Colton's men staying there? Any suspicious visitors?" Mrs. Finch's face lit up. "Do they ever? I never throw anything away. Guest registers going back 2 years. By 3 a.m, they had enough evidence to hang Colton twice over." Clara's hand cramped from writing, but she pushed on, organizing everything into a coherent narrative that any lawman or judge could follow. Colt had stationed lookouts at strategic points, creating an early warning network. "It's remarkable," Dr. Brennan said, reviewing the compiled documents. "Any single piece might be dismissed, but together, it's an indictment of a criminal empire. The question now is getting it out safely." Clara said, "The morning train won't work," Samuel Chen interrupted apologetically. "Colton has men watching the station. They check every package, every passenger. Then we go overland." Colt decided, "I know trails Colton's men won't. Can be in Cheyenne in 2 days hard riding." "You can't go alone," Clara protested. "Wasn't planning to. Need at least 3 riders, taking different routes, copies to different destinations. Improves the odds of something getting through. I'll ride." Elijah volunteered, then grimaced. "Though I'm not much good with one arm." "I'll go," a young voice said. They turned to see Tom Hutchins' son James, barely 17 but tall for his age. "I can ride, shoot if needed, and I want to help." "So do I." Another youth stepped forward, Pablo Martinez, the widow's eldest. Tom Hutchins started to protest, but his wife placed a hand on his arm. "They're not children anymore, Tom, and this is their fight too." In the end, they had 5 riders, Colt, the 2 boys, Bill Foster, who knew every trail from his livery business, and, surprisingly, Mrs. Peterson's nephew, a quiet young man named David who'd arrived just that week from Denver. "Different routes, different destinations," Colt instructed. "Territorial marshal, the governor, newspapers in Cheyenne and Denver. We leave at first light before Colton's killers arrive on the morning train." "What about the rest of us?" Clara asked. "Ford up here," Colt said. "Father Miguel's offered sanctuary. Stay together, stay visible. Make it hard for Colton to move against you without the whole territory hearing about it." Clara pulled him aside. "I should go with you." "You're needed here. You're the voice of this movement, the one who started it all. They need to see you standing firm." His hand touched her cheek briefly. "Besides, someone needs to keep these folks' courage up when things get dark." "You'll come back. Count on it." His gray eyes held promises he couldn't voice aloud. "This isn't finished until Colton faces justice. And after that," he paused. "After that, maybe we both stop running." The basement had grown quiet, people catching what sleep they could before dawn. Clara and Colt stood in a corner, speaking in whispers that felt loud as shouts in the stillness. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Clara said, "I want you to know meeting you changed everything. Not just saving me, but showing me what courage looks like. Real courage." "You had that already." Colt replied, "All I did was return the favor. You showed me something too, that maybe the past doesn't have to own the future. That maybe a man can find redemption if he's willing to fight for it." Outside, a rooster crowed, signaling the approaching dawn. In a few hours, their makeshift rebellion would be tested. Professional killers would arrive seeking blood. Evidence would race toward authorities who might or might not care. And a small group of ordinary people would discover whether their newfound courage could withstand the storm. But for now, in the pre-dawn darkness of a church basement, Clara Mayfield and Colt Barrett stood together, drawing strength from each other and from the sleeping forms around them. They'd lit a fuse that couldn't be unlit. All that remained was to see where the explosion would take them. Dawn broke gray and cold over Cedar Hollow as 5 riders prepared to depart from behind the church. Clara watched Colt check his saddle one final time, her heart heavy with worry she tried not to show. The other riders, young James Hutchins, Pablo Martinez, Bill Foster, and David Peterson, waited nervously, their saddlebags bulging with the carefully copied documents that could either save the town or get them all killed. "Remember," Colt addressed the group, his voice low but carrying authority. "Stay apart once you clear town. No more than 2 riding together. If you see dust trails following, don't try to outrun them. Go to ground and wait them out." "What if they catch us?" James asked, trying to sound brave despite the tremor in his voice. "They won't," Colt said firmly. "You know this country better than any hired gun from Texas. Use that advantage." Father Miguel emerged from the church, carrying a worn leather satchel. "For you, Mr. Barrett, blessed water, bandages, and something more practical ammunition from our hunting supplies." Clara noticed the priest's hands didn't shake as he handed over what amounted to supplies for war. The gentle shepherd had steel beneath his cloth. "Mount up," Colt ordered. As the others swung into their saddles, he turned to Clara. "Keep them together. Keep them strong. If Colton comes—" "We'll handle it," Clara interrupted. "Just worry about getting to Cheyenne." He studied her face as if memorizing it. "Sarah would have been proud to know you," he said quietly, then mounted his black stallion in one fluid motion. Clara wanted to say something, anything to make him stay, but she held her tongue. This was bigger than her fears, bigger than whatever was growing between them. She raised her hand in farewell as the 5 riders split up, disappearing into the morning mist like ghosts of justice finally given form. "Inside, everyone," Father Miguel urged. "We have preparations to make." The church basement had transformed overnight into a makeshift fortress. Dr. Brennan organized medical supplies in one corner. The widow Martinez and several other women prepared food for what might be a long siege. Tom Hutchins and Samuel Chen stacked hymn books and furniture to create barriers at the windows. "Never thought I'd be building barricades in a church," Hutchins muttered. "The Lord helps those who help themselves," Father Miguel replied. "And sometimes that help comes in the form of solid oak between you and a bullet." Clara threw herself into the work, trying not to think about Colt riding into danger. They had perhaps 3 hours before the morning train arrived with Colton's hired killers. 3 hours to turn a house of worship into a sanctuary that could withstand assault. "Miss Mayfield," Elijah called from his post at the narrow window. "Riders coming. From town." Clara's heart jumped, but it was only more townspeople seeking shelter. The baker and his family, the schoolmaster from the boys' school, even old Judge Whitman, who'd retired rather than continue serving under Colton's influence. "Heard what you're doing," the judge wheezed, leaning heavily on his cane. "Figured it was time I remembered what justice looks like." By mid-morning, nearly 30 people had gathered in the church. Not the whole town, but more than Clara had dared hope. She organized them efficiently. Those who could shoot took positions at windows. Others prepared supplies. Children were sent to the safest corner with books and quiet games to keep them occupied. "Train's coming," someone called out. The distant whistle seemed to freeze everyone in place. Clara climbed to the bell tower for a better view. Mrs. Peterson's nephew's field glasses in hand. Black smoke marked the train's approach, and her stomach clenched as she watched it slow at the depot. 3 men stepped onto the platform, and even from this distance, they radiated menace. One was tall and lean, dressed all in black with silver conchos on his vest that would be 3 Jack Thornton. The other 2, clearly brothers by their similar builds and movements, wore matching gray dusters, the Wheeler brothers. "What do you see?" Father Miguel asked from below. "Death," Clara answered quietly. walking on two legs, ×3. She watched as Sheriff Briggs met the killers, gesturing animatedly, no doubt explaining the situation. Colton's humiliation, the location of their targets. The three men listened without apparent emotion, professional dealers in death receiving their instructions. Clara descended quickly. "They're here, 3 of them, just as Elijah warned." A ripple of fear went through the assembled townspeople, but Dr. Brennan spoke up firmly. "We knew they were coming. Change is nothing. We hold our ground." "Easy for you to say," someone muttered. "You ain't got kids here." "Neither do you if Colton wins." The widow Martinez shot back. "You think he'll stop with us? Every person in this town who's shown a spark of defiance will pay. Better to stand together than hang separately." The morning dragged on with agonizing slowness. Clara positioned lookouts at every window, organized the children into a makeshift school session to keep them calm, and tried to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. Where was Colt now? Had he cleared the dangerous passes? Were the documents racing toward salvation, or had they been intercepted? "Movement," Tom Hutchins called from his window position. "Coming up Main Street." Clara peered out carefully. A procession was approaching the church. Sheriff Briggs in the lead, trying to look official. Behind him came Ray Colton himself, immaculate in a burgundy suit, flanked by his hired killers and half a dozen of his regular men. "Quite the army, Dr. Brennan observed dryly. "Stay calm," Clara said, though her own heart was racing. "They're going to try to talk first. Men like Colton prefer to win without shooting if they can. Bad for business." The group stopped just outside the church gates. Sheriff Briggs cleared his throat and called out in his reedy voice, "By order of the Cedar Hollow Sheriff's Department, I'm commanding all persons taking illegal shelter in this church to disperse immediately." "Illegal shelter." Father Miguel had climbed to the bell tower, his voice carrying clearly, "Since when is offering sanctuary illegal?" "Sheriff?" "Since it's harboring criminals and conspirators." Briggs replied, "We have warrants for Clara Mayfield and Colt Barrett on charges of theft, assault, and inciting rebellion." "Warrants you just wrote, no doubt," Clara called out, showing herself at a window. "And Mr. Barrett isn't here, as you can see." Colton stepped forward, his cultured voice carrying false reasonableness. "Miss Mayfield, this has gone far enough. You've made your point. Return the money you extorted from me. Surrender yourself for proper arrest, and I promise leniency." "Extorted," Clara laughed, surprising herself with how steady it sounded. "You mean the money you stole from school children? That money, I'm afraid it's already been distributed to purchase school supplies." "As intended." A murmur ran through Colton's men. 3 Jack Thornton tilted his head, studying the church like a problem to be solved. The Wheeler brothers stood perfectly still, hands resting near their weapons. "Search the town." Colton ordered some of his men. "Find Barrett and the others." "They're gone," Clara announced, "along with documents detailing every crime you've committed in Cedar Hollow. By now, the territorial marshal knows about your theft, extortion, and murders. The newspapers, too. Your kingdom is crumbling. Mr. Colton." Colton's mask finally slipped, rage distorting his handsome features. "You lying witch, you think you've won I own this town?" "You own fear," Father Miguel interjected. "But fear is a poor foundation. It cracks under pressure." "Enough talk," one of the Wheeler brothers said, his voice flat and emotionless. "You paying us to jaw or handle this?" Colton visibly struggled for control. "Sheriff, I want that church emptied. Now!" Briggs shifted uncomfortably. "Ray, it's a church. We can't just—" "Can't," Colton rounded on him. "Would you prefer I handle this myself without the cover of law?" The threat was clear. Briggs swallowed hard, then raised his voice again. "You have 1 hour to surrender peacefully. After that, we're coming in." The delegation retreated, but not far. Clara could see them setting up positions around the church, covering all exits. The siege had begun. "Well," Judge Whitman said, checking an ancient revolver. "Always wondered if I'd die in bed or on my feet. Guess now I know." "Nobody's dying today," Clara said firmly, though she wondered if she could keep that promise. The hour passed with excruciating slowness. Parents comforted children, couples held hands, and Father Miguel moved among them, offering prayers and encouragement. Clara found herself thinking not of death, but of life, the life she'd glimpsed possible with Colt, the life this town could have free from Colton's shadow. "Time's up," Elijah announced unnecessarily. They could all see Colton's men advancing. "Remember," Clara called out, "we're not trying to win a battle. We're trying to survive until help arrives. Make every shot count, stay behind cover, and protect each other." The first shots shattered the morning air, breaking windows and thudding into wooden doors. Clara flinched but held her position. The revolver Colt had given her heavy in her hands. "Return fire!" someone shouted, and the church erupted in thunder. Clara aimed carefully at a man trying to flank their position, her shot sending him diving for cover. Around her, the townspeople fought with desperate courage. Tom Hutchins, who'd claimed he only sold flour and beans, proved surprisingly steady with a rifle. Even Mrs. Peterson managed to wing one of Colton's men with her deceased husband's shotgun. But they were outnumbered and outgunned. 3 Jack Thornton lived up to his reputation, his pistols speaking with deadly accuracy. One of the townspeople cried out, clutching a wounded shoulder. Then another fell. Dr. Brennan immediately crawling to tend them despite the bullets whining overhead. "They're trying to get to the back door," Pablo Martinez's younger sister called out. Clara rushed to that position, arriving just as 2 of Colton's men attempted to force entry. She fired through the door, driving them back, but she could see more gathering. "We can't hold them everywhere," Elijah said grimly, reloading with his one good hand. "Too many angles, not enough guns." Just then, a new sound cut through the gunfire hoofbeats. Lots of them. Approaching fast. Clara's heart leaped. Had Colt returned, but it was too soon. Far too soon. "Riders coming," the lookout in the bell tower called. 15, maybe 20. Clara peered out cautiously, then gasped. The riders wore badges, real badges, not Sheriff Briggs's tarnished star. Marshals, a whole company of them. Thundering down Main Street like cavalry charging to the rescue. "Federal Marshals," she shouted. "Help has arrived." The effect was immediate. Colton's hired guns, professional enough to know when a job had gone bad, began fading back. Even 3 Jack Thornton holstered his weapons, hands raised as the marshals surrounded the church. "That's far enough," the lead marshal bellowed. He was a grizzled man with steel-gray whiskers and eyes like chips of flint. "This is Deputy U.S. Marshal Frank Morrison. Everyone drop your weapons. Now." Sheriff Briggs tried to bluster. "Marshal Morrison, this is a local matter." "Not anymore." Morrison cut him off. "Got a telegraph this morning from Judge Cartwright in Cheyenne. Something about systematic corruption, theft of federal education funds, and murder. Made for interesting reading over breakfast." Clara felt her knees go weak with relief. One of their riders had made it through. The documents had reached the right hands. "This is outrageous." Colton stepped forward, trying to salvage the situation. "I'm a respected businessman. These are baseless accusations from a hysterical schoolteacher." "Save it," Morrison said. "Ray Colton, you're under arrest. Boys, take him." What happened next would be debated in Cedar Hollow for years. As the marshals moved in, Colton went for a hidden derringer. 3 Jack Thornton, perhaps seeing his paycheck disappearing, drew as well. The Wheeler brothers started to follow suit. But they'd miscalculated. These weren't scared townspeople or corrupt local lawmen. The federal marshals responded with trained precision. In seconds, it was over. Thornton lay wounded. The Wheeler brothers were face down in the dirt, and Colton stood with 3 rifles aimed at his chest, his derringer unfired in his hand, and attempting to murder federal officers to the charges. Morrison said calmly, "Cuff him." As Clara watched Ray Colton being led away in chains, his empire crumbling with each step, she felt a hand on her shoulder. "Doctor." Brennan stood there, blood on his shirt from tending the wounded but smiling. "You did it," he said simply. "David facing Goliath indeed." "We did it," Clara corrected, looking around at the faces of her neighbors, bloodied but unbroken, frightened but free. "All of us." "Miss Mayfield," Marshal Morrison approached. "I understand we have you to thank for this information reaching us. I helped compile it, but the real hero is whoever rode through danger to deliver it." Morrison smiled. "That would be a young man named James Hutchins. Rode his horse near to death reaching Cheyenne. Boys got sand." Tom Hutchins made a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh, his wife clutching his arm with tears streaming down her face. Their son was safe. He was a hero. "The others?" Clara asked anxiously. "On their way back, from what I hear, all of them." Morrison studied her. "Including a Colt Barrett, friend of yours." Clara felt warmth flood her chest. "Yes, a very good friend." "He must be..." Young Hutchins said Barrett personally fought off 2 ambush attempts to make sure the boy got through. Man knows how to handle himself. As the marshals rounded up the rest of Colton's men and began taking statements, Clara climbed once more to the bell tower. The sun was setting, painting Cedar Hollow in shades of gold and crimson. For the first time in years, the town felt free. Somewhere out there, Colt was riding home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, rebuilding, healing, learning to live without fear. But tonight, Clara Mayfield stood in a church bell tower and felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. The saloon's back office had been transformed into a makeshift courtroom, with Marshal Morrison presiding over the collection of evidence. It was 2 days after Colton's arrest, and Clara sat at a table covered with ledgers, documents, and sworn testimonies. The afternoon sun slanted through dusty windows, illuminating pages that documented years of corruption. "This ledger here," Clara pointed to a particular entry, "shows $5,000 marked for special acquisitions on the same date the Watson family was burned out of their ranch." Morrison nodded, making notes. "And you're certain this is Colton's handwriting?" "I've seen enough of his correspondence to recognize it." Clara confirmed. "Plus, Mr. Chen can testify that he saw Colton writing in this exact ledger." The marshal's investigation had been thorough and methodical. With Colton in jail and his men scattered, people who'd been silent for years suddenly found their voices. The stories poured out like water through a broken dam: extortion, assault, missing persons, fixed card games, and worse. "Miss Mayfield." Morrison looked up from his notes. "I need you to understand something. Colton's got lawyers coming from Denver, expensive ones. They'll try to tear apart every piece of evidence, discredit every witness. You sure you're ready for that fight?" Clara met his gaze steadily. "I've been ready since the day they dragged me down Main Street." A commotion outside interrupted them. Clara heard horses, several of them, and her heart jumped. She rushed to the window and felt relief wash over her like cool rain. Colt Barrett was dismounting from his black stallion, travel-worn but whole. Behind him, Bill Foster and David Peterson were helping Pablo Martinez down from his horse. The young man appeared to have an injured leg but was grinning broadly. Clara didn't remember leaving the office or running down the stairs. One moment she was watching from the window. The next, she was throwing herself into Colt's arms. Propriety be damned. "You're safe," she breathed against his chest. "When you didn't come back with the others, I thought..." "Takes more than a few hired guns to stop me," Colt murmured, his arms tightening around her, "though they surely tried." Over his shoulder, Clara saw half the town gathering. James Hutchins was already being embraced by his parents, the young man basking in his newfound hero status. The story of their rides was spreading quickly, ambushes fought off, treacherous passes navigated, documents delivered despite all odds. "Pablo needs the doc," Bill Foster called out. "Took a bullet in the thigh, but the boy's tougher than leather. Kept riding." Dr. Brennan appeared as if summoned, immediately taking charge of the wounded young man. The widow Martinez alternated between scolding her son and weeping with relief. "Inside," Marshal Morrison ordered, appearing in the saloon doorway. "All of you need to hear what happened while the memory's fresh." The next hour was spent in detailed debriefing. Colt recounted the ambush at Miller's Canyon, where 6 of Colton's men had been waiting. Young James Hutchins had shown remarkable courage, creating a distraction that allowed Colt to flank their attackers. "Boy's a natural rider," Colt said, nodding to James. "And steady under fire. His father should be proud." Tom Hutchins looked ready to burst with that very emotion, his arm around his son's shoulders. The second attempt was at Devil's Creek. Bill Foster took up the tale. "They destroyed the bridge, thought they had us trapped, but Pablo here remembered an old cattle crossing upstream. My father showed it to me," Pablo said from the couch where Dr. Brennan was tending his wound. "Before Colton had him killed, felt like maybe his spirit was guiding us." Marshal Morrison absorbed all this with professional interest, and the documents reached their destinations. "Every one," David Peterson confirmed. "I personally saw mine delivered to the newspaper editor in Denver. He was already setting type when I left. By week's end, Colton's name will be synonymous with corruption across the territory," Bill Foster added with satisfaction. As the debriefing continued, Clara noticed Colt favoring his left side. When she caught his eye and raised an eyebrow in question, he gave a slight shake of his head later, but she filed it away, one more worry among many. That evening found a smaller group gathered in the church, the core conspirators celebrating their victory with a modest supper. Father Miguel had broken out the communion wine for the occasion, declaring it a holy celebration of justice delivered to absent friends. Dr. Brennan raised his glass, thinking of those who died under Colton's rule. "To present ones," Clara added, her eyes finding Colt across the table. "To the future," Father Miguel concluded. "May it be brighter than the past." As the evening wore on, people drifted away to their homes, real homes, not hiding places. Soon, only Clara and Colt remained, sitting in a pew near the altar where candles flickered in the darkness. "You're hurt," Clara said. It wasn't a question. Colt grimaced. "Caught some buckshot at Miller's Canyon. Nothing serious, but it smarts some." "Let me see." "Clara, let me see," she repeated firmly, with a resigned sigh. Colt removed his vest and pulled up his shirt. Clara gasped at the peppered wounds along his ribs, some still seeping blood. "You rode 2 days like this." She was already moving, gathering water and clean cloths from the church's supplies. "Had worse in the war," Colt said, then hissed as she began cleaning the wounds. "Though I'll admit, that stings more than getting shot." "Good. Maybe next time you'll duck." Despite her scolding tone, Clara's hands were infinitely gentle as she worked. "Couldn't duck. Had to make sure James got through." Colt watched her face as she tended him. "He reminded me of someone. Your brother. Myself, young, eager to prove something. Difference is, he's proving himself for the right reasons." Clara finished cleaning the wounds and began applying bandages. "And what were your reasons back then?" "Glory, adventure. Thought war would make me a man." He laughed bitterly. "It made me a killer. Took me years to figure out the difference." "You're not a killer," Clara said firmly. "You're a protector. There's a world of difference." "Is there?" Colt caught her hands, stilling them. "I've got blood on these hands. Clara, more than you know." "And you've used those same hands to save lives?" mine included. She turned her palms up in his, studying the calluses and scars. I don't see a killer's hands. I see hands that have known hard work and harder choices. Hands that held a dying sister. Hands that fought for justice when everyone else turned away. Colt was quiet for a long moment. You see me different than I see myself. Maybe I see you clearer. Clara realized how close they were sitting, how natural it felt to be touching him. The question is, what happens now? Colton's going to prison. His men are scattered. The town's free. Colt's thumbs traced circles on her palms. Guess that means my work here is done. Clara's heart sank. You're leaving. That was the plan. Help you with Colton, then move on. It's what I do. What if you didn't? The words tumbled out before Clara could stop them. What if you stayed? Clara. The town needs a real sheriff. Someone honest. Someone who can't be bought. She pulled her hands free, needing distance to make her argument. Morrison said as much. With Briggs arrested along with Colton, the position's open. I'm no lawman. Not anymore. You were once. You could be again. Clara stood, pacing in front of the altar. The children need teachers, but they also need to feel safe. The town needs rebuilding. Not just buildings, but trust. You could help with that. And what would I do with a sheriff's salary? Colt asked. Where would I live? That cabin's fine for a drifter. But you could live in town, get a proper house, maybe. Clara stopped, suddenly shy. Maybe not live alone. Colt stood slowly, moving to face her. Clara Mayfield, are you proposing something improper? Despite the tension, Clara laughed. I'm proposing you stop running, that you build something instead of just protecting what others build, that you consider the possibility that you've found where you belong. And if where I belong is with you, the question hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Clara thought of all the reasons to be cautious. They'd known each other mere days, born of crisis and violence. But she also thought of how natural it felt to stand beside him, how empty the victory would feel if he left. Then I'd say it's about time you figured that out, she said softly. Colt crossed the space between them in 2 strides, his hands framing her face. You sure about this? I'm not an easy man. Clara, I've got ghosts, bad dreams, a temper when pushed. I don't know how to be settled. And I'm a stubborn schoolteacher who picks fights with dangerous men and doesn't know when to back down. Clara countered. We'll learn together. When he kissed her, it was like coming home after a long journey. All the fear and violence of recent days fell away, leaving just this 2 souls who'd found each other across unlikely circumstances. Stay, Clara whispered against his lips. Please stay. Already decided to. Colt admitted. Minute I saw you running down those stairs today. Just wanted to hear you ask. Clara swatted his chest, carefully avoiding his wounds. Impossible man. Impossible woman, he countered, then grew serious. I'll need to wire Morrison about the sheriff position and find a ring. Your mother raised you proper. I should do this right. My mother would have liked you. Clara said, she always told me to find a man with courage and conviction. Someone who'd stand for what's right even when it costs him. And I found a woman who'd take on a whole town's corruption with nothing but truth and determination. Colt replied, Sarah would say I got the better end of the bargain. They stood together in the candlelit church, planning a future that had seemed impossible just days before. There would be challenges: Colton's trial, rebuilding the town's trust, learning to live without the shadow of fear that had defined Cedar Hollow for so long. But tonight, with justice delivered and love declared, anything seemed possible. One thing, Colt said as they prepared to leave. I'm keeping the cabin too. Man needs a place to get away. Think clearly. As long as you're not getting away from me, Clara warned. Never, he promised, and sealed it with another kiss. Outside, Cedar Hollow slept peacefully for the first time in years. The Lucky Spur stood dark and empty, awaiting transformation into something that would serve the community instead of bleeding it. The school would soon have new supplies, new books, new hope. And in the church, where desperate citizens had made their stand, two people had found something worth fighting for beyond justice, a future together. Marshal Morrison would later report that the Cedar Hollow incident was one of the cleanest operations he'd overseen. The evidence was overwhelming, the witnesses united, and the town's recovery swift. But what his official report wouldn't capture was the real victory, the moment when ordinary people chose courage over fear, when a drifting gunman found home, and when a schoolteacher's righteous anger lit a fire that burned away years of darkness. The real story of Cedar Hollow wasn't about the fall of Ray Colton. It was about what rose in his place. The storm rolled in just after midnight, thunder shaking the walls of Colt's cabin like artillery fire. Clara woke with a start, momentarily disoriented until she felt the solid warmth of Colt beside her. They'd been married 3 weeks now. A simple ceremony in Father Miguel's church with half the town in attendance. She was still getting used to waking up next to him, to the reality that this hard, dangerous man had chosen to bind his life to hers. Lightning illuminated the room in stark flashes, and she saw Colt was already awake. Staring at the ceiling with that 1,000-yard look she'd learned meant his mind was elsewhere, usually somewhere dark. "The storm wake you?" she asked softly. "Sounds like cannon fire," he admitted. "Takes me back sometimes." Clara curled closer, her hand finding the scars on his chest, some old from the war, others newer from their fight against Colton. "You're here," she reminded him. "Safe. With me." "I know." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Just habit, I suppose. Sleeping light, expecting trouble." As if summoned by his words. Buck started barking frantically outside. Not his normal greeting bark, but the aggressive warning of danger approaching. Colt was out of bed instantly. Reaching for the gun belt hanging on the bedpost. "Stay here," he ordered, pulling on his trousers. "Like hell," Clara muttered, grabbing her wrapper and the small pistol he'd been teaching her to use. Through the rain-lashed window, they could see riders approaching, 5 of them, moving fast despite the treacherous conditions. Lightning revealed their faces, and Clara's blood went cold. "Ray Colton," she breathed. It was impossible. Colton was in the territorial prison awaiting trial. But there he was, soaked and wild-eyed, flanked by 4 hard-looking men Clara didn't recognize. "Prison break," Colt said grimly. Should have known he'd have an escape plan. The riders reined up just outside effective pistol range. Colton's voice carried over the storm, filled with manic rage. "Barrett, I know you're in there with your whore. Come out and face judgment." "Charming as ever," Clara muttered, checking her pistol's load. "Clara, I need you to—" "If you say hide or run, Colt Barrett, I'll shoot you myself." Clara interrupted. "We're in this together. Remember, for better or worse." Despite the danger, Colt almost smiled. "Worse seems to have found us quick." "Barrett," Colton screamed again. "You took everything from me, my business, my freedom, my reputation. Now I'm going to take everything from you." Colt moved to the window, careful to stay out of direct sight. "You took those things yourself. Colton, every crime, every murder that was your choice." "I own this territory," lightning flashed, illuminating Colton's twisted features. "Until you poisoned it against me, you and that sanctimonious schoolteacher." 5 against 2, Clara assessed quietly. "And they'll have rifles." 4 against 2, Colt corrected. "Look at Colton's left arm." Clara looked closer and saw Colton's arm hanging useless, wrapped in bloody bandages. A prison break wound, most likely. "Still bad odds," she said. "Had worse." Colt was already moving, gathering ammunition, checking sight lines. "They'll try to burn us out. This rain's the only thing stopping them." As if to emphasize his point, one of Colton's men produced a torch, trying unsuccessfully to light it in the downpour. We could ford up. Clara suggested, wait for help. Someone must have seen them ride through town. Maybe, but Colton's desperate. Desperate men do stupid things. Colt studied the terrain through the window. That rock outcrop to the east, if I could reach it. We could reach it, Clara corrected. Clara? Together, she said firmly. Or do you think I can't shoot straight in the rain? Before Colt could argue further, Colton made the decision for them. Burn it all down! His men dismounted, seeking better positions. In the lightning flashes, Clara saw them spreading out, trying to surround the cabin. No choice now. Colt said, we go out the back, make for the rocks. Ready? Clara nodded, her heart hammering but her hands steady. They slipped out the back door into the storm, immediately soaked by the driving rain. Buck tried to follow, but Colt ordered him back inside with a sharp gesture. The dash to the rocks was the longest 30 yards of Clara's life. Thunder covered their movement, but also masked any sounds of pursuit. They tumbled behind the granite outcrop just as a rifle cracked, the bullet sparking off stone inches from Clara's head. So much for stealth, Colt muttered, returning fire. The gunfight that followed was unlike the organized battle at the church. This was chaotic, desperate, lit by lightning flashes and muzzle flares. Clara fired when she had clear shots, trying to conserve her limited ammunition. Barrett. Colton's voice was closer now, moving along their flank. I had 3 years to think about this moment, 3 years in a cage because of you. Should have thought about that before you started stealing from children. Colt called back, then immediately rolled to a new position as bullets peppered his former spot. Clara saw movement to their left, one of Colton's men trying to circle behind them. She fired twice, driving him back into cover. The storm was worsening, turning the ground into a muddy morass. Clara, watch! Colt's warning came too late. One of Colton's men had worked around their right side, rising from a gully with his rifle trained on her. Clara knew she couldn't bring her pistol around in time. The shot that rang out wasn't his. The man stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder, his rifle falling into the mud. Through the rain, Clara saw more muzzle flashes not from Colton's group, but from the direction of town. It's the marshal, someone shouted. Morrison and a posse. The tide turned in an instant. Colton's men, already rattled by the storm and fierce resistance, broke at the sight of a dozen armed riders thundering toward them. 2 threw down their weapons immediately. Another tried to flee and was ridden down by the posse. Only Colton remained, standing in the rain like a madman, his good hand clutching a pistol. No, this isn't over, I won't go back. It's done. Colton, Marshal Morrison's voice boomed over the storm. Drop the weapon. Instead, Colton turned toward Clara in Colt's position, raising his gun with trembling hatred. If I can't have justice, I'll have revenge. 3 guns fired simultaneously, Colt's, Clara's, and Morrison's. Colton spun and fell, his shot going wild into the storm-torn sky. He landed face down in the mud, twitched once, and was still. The silence that followed seemed louder than the thunder. Are you folks all right? Morrison called, riding closer. Clara realized she was shaking, adrenaline and cold rain combining to set her teeth chattering. Colt wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. We're fine, he called back. How did you know? Prison break happened yesterday. Figured Colton would come here first. Man like him can't let a grudge go. Morrison dismounted, looking down at Colton's body with professional dispassion. Save the territory the cost of a hanging, at least. One of Morrison's deputies approached. Want us to search the cabin? Make sure it's clear. It's clear, Colt said. Just my dog in there, probably hiding under the bed. He doesn't like thunder. As if to prove him wrong. Buck came barreling out of the cabin, muddy paws and all, nearly knocking Clara over in his enthusiasm to ensure they were safe. Brave when it counts, Clara said, scratching the dog's ears despite being covered in mud herself. The posse efficiently rounded up Colton's surviving men. Morrison supervised the removal of Colton's body with the same calm professionalism he'd shown throughout the entire affair. "You two need anything?" the marshal asked. "Doc Brennan's with the posse if you're hurt." "Just cold and wet," Clara assured him. "We'll be fine." Morrison touched his hat brim. "Hell of a thing. A man coming all this way just for revenge. Could have started fresh somewhere else, but some folks can't let go of hate." After the posse left, Clara and Colt stood in their rain-soaked yard, looking at each other. Clara's hair hung in wet strings, her wrapper clinging to her form. Colt's chest was bare, streaked with mud and rain. They were alive, against all odds. "So much for our quiet life in the country," Clara said, a hysterical giggle bubbling up. "You all right?" Colt asked, concerned. Clara took a shaky breath. "I shot a man, maybe killed him. I don't even know which one of us hit Colton." "Does it matter?" Colt pulled her against him. "He came here to kill us. We defended ourselves. That's all there is to it." "Is it always going to be like this? Someone from your past or mine showing up with guns?" Colt was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I hope not. But if it is, we'll face it like we did tonight. Together." Clara looked up at him, rain running down both their faces. "Together," she agreed. They squelched back to the cabin, Buck dancing around their feet. Inside was mostly dry, though the wind had blown rain through the open back door. Clara found herself laughing again, this time with genuine humor. "What?" Colt asked. "I was just thinking most brides worry about burning dinner or keeping house. I'm out here in my night clothes shooting at escaped convicts in thunderstorms." "Having second thoughts about marrying a gunfighter?" Colt asked, though she heard the real concern beneath his light tone. Clara turned to face him fully. "Never, though I might have thoughts about hot baths and dry clothes." "I'll heat water," Colt offered immediately, as he busied himself with the stove. Clara watched him move this dangerous man who'd become her husband, her protector, her partner in every sense. The violence of the night was already fading, leaving only the knowledge that they'd survived another test. "Colt." "I love you." He turned from the stove, crossing to her in quick strides. "I love you too, more than I thought I could love anyone after." He paused. "Just more than I thought possible." They kissed there in their storm-battered cabin, muddy and exhausted, but alive. Outside, the thunder was moving off, the rain beginning to slacken. By dawn, the storm would be just a memory, leaving clear skies and fresh-washed air. "No more midnight visitors, I hope," Clara said against his lips. "I'll board up the windows if you want," Colt offered, only half joking. "Don't you dare. I like the morning light." Clara pulled back, suddenly serious. "We can't live in fear. Colt, not of Colton's ghost, not of your past, not of what might come. We faced it all down tonight. We won." "We did," Colt agreed. "Though I'd prefer our future victories to involve less mud." Clara laughed, the sound bright in the dim cabin. "I'll see what I can arrange. Now, about that hot water." As Colt heated water and Clara found dry clothes, Buck settled by the fire with a contented sigh. The cabin felt like home again, the violence of the night already being transformed into just another story, another survival. Later, clean and warm in their bed, Clara traced the new bruises on Colt's shoulder where he'd rolled across the rocks. "We make quite a pair, don't we? The gunfighter and the schoolmarm." Colt agreed. "Though after tonight, maybe I should say the gunfighters, plural. I prefer sheriff and teacher," Clara corrected. "Sounds more respectable." "If you say so," Colt murmured, already half asleep. Clara lay awake a bit longer, listening to the gentling rain and Colt's steady breathing. Ray Colton was gone. Truly gone this time. The last shadow from their violent beginning had been swept away by the storm. Tomorrow she'd return to her students, Colt to his duties as sheriff. They'd build their life day by day, hopefully with less gunfire and more quiet evenings. But if trouble came again, they'd face it as they had tonight together, unafraid and unbreakable. The storm passed, leaving stars visible through the window. Clara closed her eyes and slept, secure in the knowledge that whatever dawn brought, she wouldn't face it alone. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Clara made her way to the courthouse, her boots clicking on the wooden sidewalk with determined precision. 3 months had passed since Ray Colton's death, and Cedar Hollow had flourished in his absence like a garden finally free of weeds. But today brought a new challenge, one that threatened to resurrect old ghosts. Judge Calvin Harrington had arrived from Denver the previous evening, dispatched by the territorial government to oversee what he called irregularities in the disposition of Colton's assets. Clara clutched the folder of documents tighter, her jaw set with the same determination that had faced down Colton himself. Inside the courthouse, a grand name for what was essentially a large wooden building with pretensions, she found the scene already set. Judge Harrington sat behind the bench, a thin man with pomaded hair and cold eyes that reminded her unpleasantly of a snake. To one side sat Phineas Blackwood, who claimed to be Colton's business partner from Denver, accompanied by 2 lawyers in city suits. "Ah, Mrs. Barrett," the judge said, managing to make her married name sound like an insult. "How good of you to join us. And where is your husband, the sheriff?" "Maintaining law and order, as is his duty." Clara replied evenly. "I'm here representing the Cedar Hollow Education Committee regarding the disposition of the Lucky Spur property." "Yes, about that." Blackwood leaned forward, his thick gold rings catching the light. "That property belongs to Mr. Colton's estate, which I have legitimate claim to as his business partner. Your town council had no right to seize it." "The town council seized nothing," Clara said, taking her seat at the opposing table. "Ray Colton's assets were frozen pending investigation of his crimes. The Lucky Spur was purchased at public auction with funds raised by the community. Under highly irregular circumstances, one of Blackwood's lawyers interjected. Our client contends the auction was invalid, conducted without proper notice to interested parties in Denver." Clara opened her folder, extracting a document. The auction was advertised in 3 territorial newspapers for the required 30 days. All legal requirements were met, as verified by Marshal Morrison. "A marshal who clearly favored your local interests," Judge Harrington observed, his tone suggesting what he thought of such favoritism. The doors burst open, and Elijah stumped in, his one good arm carrying a wooden crate. "Sorry I'm late. Mrs. Barrett had to dig these out of storage." "What is the meaning of this interruption?" Judge Harrington demanded. "Evidence, Your Honor," Clara said calmly. "Mr. Elijah has brought Ray Colton's private papers, recovered from a hidden safe in the Lucky Spur." Blackwood's face went pale. "Those papers are private property." "Were private property," Clara corrected. "Now they're evidence in an ongoing federal investigation." She stood, addressing the judge directly. "Your Honor, if you'll examine these documents, you'll find that Mr. Blackwood's partnership with Ray Colton involved running illegal gambling operations, opium trafficking, and money laundering. Hardly the basis for a legitimate claim." "This is outrageous." Blackwood shot to his feet. "Those documents were obtained illegally." "From a property purchased at legal public auction," Clara interrupted smoothly. She'd learned from watching Colt that sometimes the best defense was a calm offense. "A property, I might add, that we intend to convert into a school and library for the benefit of all Cedar Hollow's children." Judge Harrington's eyes narrowed. "You seem very sure of yourself, Mrs. Barrett. Some might say overly so for a mere school teacher." "With respect, Your Honor, I'm not merely anything. I'm an educated woman who knows the law, Married to a decorated war veteran who now serves as our duly appointed sheriff. More importantly, I'm someone who believes justice means something, even in a small town like Cedar Hollow. The judge's face flushed. You dare lecture me on justice? I dare stand for it, Clara replied. Just as I stood against Ray Colton when everyone else was too frightened. Just as this town stood together when he brought hired killers to our streets. We've bled for our freedom. Your Honor, we won't see it stolen by legal trickery. I could hold you in contempt, the judge warned. You could, Clara agreed. And then you'd have to explain to the territorial governor why you jailed the woman whose testimony helped convict the territory's most notorious criminal. The same woman, I might add, who's been corresponding with the governor's wife about establishing teaching colleges in the territory. It wasn't quite a lie she had written to Mrs. Governor Cartwright about education, and received a cordial reply. But the judge didn't need to know the extent of their correspondence. Blackwood's lawyers were whispering urgently to their client. Clara pressed her advantage, pulling out another document. Furthermore, Your Honor, I have here a sworn affidavit from Mr. Samuel Chen, who laundered Mr. Blackwood's shirts during his visits to Cedar Hollow. Mr. Chen is prepared to testify about bloodstains consistent with violence and conversations overheard regarding illegal activities. Hearsay, one lawyer protested. Physical evidence and direct witness testimony, Clara countered, combined with the financial records clearly showing Mr. Blackwood's involvement in criminal enterprises. The courtroom doors opened again, and this time it was Colt who entered, his sheriff's star catching the morning light. He moved with that easy confidence that made strong men step aside, taking position beside Clara's table. Your Honor, he said with a polite nod. Hope I'm not interrupting. Just wanted to make sure these proceedings were being conducted properly. Sheriff Barrett, the judge said stiffly. Your presence is noted but not required. Oh, I think it might be, Colt said mildly. See, I've got a telegram here from Marshal Morrison. Seems Mr. Blackwood is wanted for questioning in Denver regarding a murder there. Something about a business partner who inconveniently died right before a major deal. Blackwood shot to his feet. That's a lie. Telegraph don't lie, Colt observed. And neither does the Denver sheriff who's on his way here to collect you. He glanced at the judge. Unless, of course, these proceedings wrap up quick with Mr. Blackwood withdrawing his claim and leaving town immediate-like. The judge's face had gone from flushed to pale. Clara realized he'd probably taken money from Blackwood, expecting an easy ruling against ignorant frontier folk. Instead, he'd walked into a trap of evidence and determination. Your Honor, Clara said, her voice gentler now, offering him a way out. The town of Cedar Hollow seeks only to better itself through education and lawful commerce. We have no interest in pursuing matters that are better left to federal authorities. If Mr. Blackwood withdraws his claim, we'd be satisfied to let Denver deal with any other complications. It was masterfully done, a threat wrapped in silk, a face-saving exit offered with grace. The judge seized it like a drowning man grabbing rope. Mr. Blackwood, he said formally, given the evidence presented and the pending federal matters, do you wish to pursue your claim? Blackwood looked at his lawyers, at Colt's steady gaze, at the documents spread before Clara like weapons. I withdraw my claim, he said through gritted teeth. So noted. This matter is closed. The judge banged his gavel with unseemly haste. These proceedings are adjourned. As Blackwood and his entourage hurried out, the judge paused beside Clara. You're a dangerous woman, Mrs. Barrett. Only to those who threaten what I love, Clara replied evenly. After the courtroom emptied, Colt pulled Clara into his arms. Brilliant, he murmured against her hair. Absolutely brilliant. Remind me never to get on your bad side. As if you could, Clara laughed, the tension finally leaving her shoulders. Was Marshal Morrison really sending someone? He is now Sent him a telegram this morning about Blackwood showing up. Colt grinned. Figured it couldn't hurt to check if Denver wanted him for anything. Elijah approached, beaming. Mrs. Barrett, that was something to see. You had that judge dancing like a puppet on strings. We all did, Clara corrected. This was a town effort, just like always. She looked at the crate of documents. Though we should probably turn these over to Morrison, just to be safe. Already planned on it, Colt said. But first, I think the Education Committee should tour its new property. Make sure you got what you paid for. They walked together down Main Street, joined by others who'd heard about the confrontation. Dr. Brennan, Father Miguel, the widow Martinez, Tom Hutchins and his family, all the people who'd stood together against Colton and now stood together for something better. The Lucky Spur looked different in daylight. Its gaudy paint fading, but the bones of the building solid. Clara could already envision it classrooms where the gaming tables had been, a library where the bar stood, light streaming through windows that had been shuttered against shame. It'll take work, Tom Hutchins said, his merchant's eye assessing the needed repairs. Everything worth doing takes work. The widow Martinez replied, My Miguel would have loved this, his children learning in the very place that tried to destroy us. We'll need teachers, Clara said, her mind already racing ahead. Real teachers, trained properly, and books, so many books. One step at a time, Colt said, his hand finding hers. Today we secured the building. Tomorrow we start transforming it. Like you transformed, Clara asked quietly, for his ears alone. Like we transformed each other, he corrected. Father Miguel raised his voice in an impromptu blessing, thanking the Almighty for justice delivered and wisdom granted. The group bowed their heads, standing in the doorway of what had been a den of vice and would become a beacon of learning. You know Blackwood won't give up easy, Colt warned later, as they walked home. Men like him don't forget being humiliated. Then we'll be ready, Clara said simply. We've faced worse than angry businessmen from Denver. We've faced evil itself and won. That we have. Colt agreed. Though I'd prefer our future battles to involve less gunplay and more legal documents, says the man who walked in with perfect timing and a federal warrant. Clara teased. I learned from the best, Colt replied, pulling her closer. My wife taught me that sometimes the pen really is mightier than the sword. Though it doesn't hurt to have both, Clara added pragmatically. As they reached their house, they'd moved to town after Colton's death. Though Colt kept the cabin for hunting trips, Clara saw a familiar figure on the porch. James Hutchins, now 17 and Colt's deputy, stood with barely contained excitement. Sheriff Mrs. Barrett telegram just came from the governor's office. Clara's heart jumped as she read the message. The Territorial Education Board was officially commending Cedar Hollow for its innovative approach to community education and approving funding for the conversion of the Lucky Spur into the Cedar Hollow Academy. We did it, she breathed. We really did it. You did it, Colt corrected. You had the vision. We just helped clear the obstacles. That evening, as news of the victory spread, an impromptu celebration began in the town square. Music spilled from the hotel. Children ran between the adults' legs, and for the first time in years, the people of Cedar Hollow danced in their own streets without fear. Clara stood with Colt on their porch, watching the festivities. From a town ruled by fear to this, she mused. Sometimes I can hardly believe it. Believe it, Colt said. You wrote it into existence with courage and cleverness, though I'm glad the writing's done for now. Man can only take so much excitement. Clara laughed, but her expression grew thoughtful. Is it done? Though there are other towns like ours, other Coltons holding people down. Maybe we should... Clara Barrett, Colt interrupted. Are you planning on taking on the entire territory's corruption? Not the entire territory, Clara said innocently. Just the parts we can reach. Colt groaned theatrically. But Clara saw the pride in his eyes. "I married a crusader." "You married a teacher," Clara corrected. And sometimes the most important lessons are about standing up for what's right. As the stars came out over Cedar Hollow, the town celebrated its freedom and its future. In a few months, the lucky spur would echo with children's voices instead of drunken shouts. Where cards had been dealt, students would read. Where blood had been spilled, knowledge would grow. It wasn't the end of their story. Clara was already composing letters to other territorial educators. And Colt was working with Morrison to establish a network of honest lawmen. But it was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, written not in violence, but in hope, not in fear, but in community. The gunfighter and the schoolmarm had become the sheriff and the educator. But more than that, they'd become the heart of a town reborn. And as Cedar Hollow danced into its new future, Clara and Colt Barrett stood together, partners in all things, ready for whatever chapters remained to be written. 1 year later, the autumn sun painted Cedar Hollow in familiar shades of gold. But everything else had changed. Where the Lucky Spur Saloon once stood, the Cedar Hollow Academy now welcomed students through its freshly painted doors. Clara stood on the front steps, watching children stream in for another day of learning, their laughter replacing the rough voices that had once echoed from these walls. "Mrs. Barrett," young Annie Chen called out, clutching a composition book. "I finished the essay about Wyoming Territory history." "Wonderful. Annie, place it on my desk, and we'll review it together after arithmetic." Clara smiled as the girl hurried inside, remembering when Annie's father had been too frightened to even walk past this building. A familiar figure on horseback approached Colt, making his morning rounds. He'd grown into the sheriff's role like he'd been born for it, bringing law and order without the tyranny that had marked Briggs's tenure. The star on his chest caught the morning light as he dismounted. "Morning, Mrs. Barrett," he said formally, touching his hat brim, though his gray eyes danced with private warmth. "Just wanted to let you know Elijah's finished the new desks. He'll deliver them this afternoon." "Tell him we're grateful," Clara replied. "His craftsmanship gets better every time, even with one arm," Colt finished. "He'd say the same. Man's found his purpose again." It was true. Elijah had reopened his forge, now partnered with 2 younger men who'd come to Cedar Hollow seeking honest work. The town was drawing such people, those looking for a fresh start in a place where justice meant something. "Will you be home for supper?" Clara asked quietly. "Wouldn't miss it," Colt promised. "Especially tonight." Tonight, the anniversary of their stand against Ray Colton. The town had decided to mark it not with celebration, but with quiet remembrance and renewed commitment to the values they'd fought for. As Colt rode off, Clara entered the academy. The main classroom buzzed with activity, 23 students ranging from 6 to 16, all eager to learn. The walls displayed maps, arithmetic charts, and compositions written in careful hands. Where bottles had lined shelves, books now stood in neat rows. "Good morning, class," Clara called, and the children quickly took their seats. "Good morning, Mrs. Barrett," they chorused. She began the day with history, telling them about the founding of Wyoming Territory, but her mind kept drifting to their own history. Some of these children had cowered in this very building while bullets flew. Now they sat here learning, growing, becoming the future Cedar Hollow deserved. At recess, she noticed Pablo Martinez helping younger students with their letters. His leg had healed well from the bullet wound, leaving only a slight limp and a story he'd tell his own children someday. He'd become one of her assistant teachers, passionate about education in a way that would have made his late father proud. "Miss Clara," the widow Martinez appeared in the doorway, bearing a basket. "Fresh bread for the children's lunch." The widow had opened a bakery where one of Colton's gambling dens had operated. Her bread was the best in 3 counties, and she donated loaves daily to ensure no child learned on an empty stomach. "You're too generous, Senora Martinez," Clara said. "Nonsense. We feed the body so you can feed the mind." The widow's eyes grew distant. "My Miguel always said education was the only inheritance that couldn't be stolen. Colton proved him wrong about many things, but not that." As the day progressed, Clara taught arithmetic, composition, and natural sciences. She watched young James Foster, son of the livery owner, help struggling classmates with their sums. Watched Annie Chen lose herself in a book about far-off places. Watched the Brennan twins share their slate and chalk without quarreling. These children would grow up different from their parents. They'd know their rights, understand law and justice, question authority when it overstepped. They'd be harder to oppress, harder to frighten into submission. Knowledge was their armor against future Coltons. "Mrs. Barrett." A small voice interrupted her thoughts. Little Thomas Hutchins, grandson of the general store owner, stood beside her desk. "My grandpa says you're a hero. Is that true?" Clara knelt to his eye level. "Your grandfather is kind, but heroes are just ordinary people who do what's needed when it matters. Someday, you might be someone's hero too." The boy's eyes widened with possibility before he scampered back to his seat. The afternoon brought a surprise visitor, Judge Whitman, leaning heavily on his cane but with eyes sharp as ever. He'd become an informal legal advisor to the town, helping establish proper ordinances and procedures. "Mrs. Barrett, might I observe your civics lesson? I have some thoughts on explaining the territorial charter to young minds." We'd be honored. Judge." The old man's lesson was masterful, breaking down complex legal concepts into stories and examples the children could grasp. Clara watched, learning teaching techniques even as her students learned law. As the school day ended, parents arrived to collect their children. Many lingered, discussing the evening's memorial service, sharing news, building community in ways Colton's reign had made impossible. Dr. Brennan arrived to walk his twins home, mentioning that he'd treated no gunshot wounds in 6 months, a Cedar Hollow record. After the last student left, Clara tidied the classroom, finding deep satisfaction in the mundane task. A year ago, she'd been dragged past this building in fear. Now she swept its floors with pride. Colt arrived as promised, along with Father Miguel, the judge, and other members of the town council. They gathered in what had been the saloon's main room, now the Academy's assembly hall. Before the public service, Father Miguel said, "I thought we should remember privately, those of us who were here, who stood together." They formed a circle, hands joined, as Father Miguel led a prayer of thanksgiving and remembrance. When he finished, Judge Whitman spoke. "I've lived through war and peace, seen justice perverted and restored. What happened in Cedar Hollow wasn't just about stopping one bad man. It was about a community finding its soul and keeping it." Tom Hutchins added, "Every day we choose to maintain what we fought for." Clara felt Colt's hand tighten around hers. "The price of freedom is eternal vigilance," he quoted. Someone famous said that. Someone smart, Clara agreed. Which is why we teach these children to be vigilant, to know their rights, to stand for others as we stood together. As the sun set, they moved outside where the town was gathering. A simple stone marker had been placed in the square, "To those who stood for justice when justice seemed lost. Cedar Hollow remembers." The service was brief but moving. No speeches about glory or revenge, just quiet recognition of courage and community. Children placed wildflowers at the marker's base. The church bell tolled once for each person who died under Colton's rule, a sobering number that reminded everyone why they'd fought. Afterward, the town didn't disperse. Musicians appeared with fiddles and guitars. Tables emerged laden with food. What had begun as remembrance transformed into affirmation of life. Couples danced where Colton's men had once swaggered. Children played where violence had ruled. Clara found herself pulled into a reel, Colt's strong arms guiding her through the steps, around them. Cedar Hollow celebrated not just survival, but transformation. "Any regrets?" Colt asked as they paused for breath. "About what?" "Quiet life of a schoolmarm. Could have had that somewhere else, without the gunfights and courtroom battles." Clara laughed. "A quiet life, Colt Barrett. Have you met the Hutchins twins, or tried to teach long division to teenagers? I face rebellion daily. It's just armed with spitballs instead of bullets." "Point taken," he grinned. "Though I notice you're already planning expansion. Saw those sketches for a second floor." "We need more space. I've had inquiries from neighboring towns about sending their children here. The academy's reputation is spreading." "Just like its founders," Colt said proudly. "Marshall Morrison mentioned you're being considered for the Territorial Education Board." "It's just talk," Clara demurred, though she flushed with pleasure. "Besides, my place is here. These children need consistency, especially after what they've lived through." As the evening deepened, Clara noticed a lone rider approaching a young woman in traveling clothes, looking uncertain. Colt noticed too, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun before relaxing. "Can we help you, miss?" he called out. The woman dismounted carefully. "I'm looking for Mrs. Clara Barrett. I'm told she runs a school here." "I'm Clara Barrett." Clara stepped forward. "How can I help you?" "My name is Margaret Foster. No relation to your town's Foster," she added quickly. "I've just completed Teachers College in Chicago. I heard about your academy, about what this town accomplished. I was hoping, that is, I wondered if you might need another teacher." Clara exchanged glances with Colt, who nodded slightly. "Why don't we discuss it over supper? You must be tired from your journey." As they led Margaret toward the hotel, Clara felt the wheel of change continuing to turn. New people, new possibilities, new challenges, but also new hopes, new dreams, new futures being written. Later that night, Clara and Colt sat on their porch swing, watching stars appear over the mountains. Buck lay at their feet, occasionally thumping his tail in sleepy contentment. "Think she'll work out?" Colt asked, referring to Margaret Foster. "She has courage, traveling alone to a frontier town, seeking a position based on principles rather than pay, yes. I think she'll do fine." "Like another teacher I know," Colt said, pulling her closer. They swung gently, listening to the night sounds so different from a year ago when danger had lurked in every shadow. Now, the evening brought only peace and promise. "I've been thinking," Clara said eventually. "Dangerous habit?" Colt teased. "About Sarah, your sister." She felt him tense slightly, but continued. "The academy needs a formal name, something that honors why we fought, what we gained. What would you think of calling it the Sarah Barrett Academy for Learning?" Colt was silent so long Clara feared she'd overstepped. Then he cleared his throat roughly. "She'd have liked that. Liked you. Liked all of this people standing up, children learning, justice meaning something." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Yes, let's do that." They sat in comfortable silence, each lost in thought. The town slept peacefully around them, the academy standing proud where corruption once festered, children dreaming in beds once empty of hope. "No gunfights for 6 months, Clara mused. "Think we're getting soft?" "Speak for yourself." Colt replied. "I had to break up a fight between 2 farmers over water rights just last week. Nearly came to blows over irrigation ditches." "The Wild West, indeed," Clara laughed. "From gunfighters to water disputes. I suppose that's progress." "It is," Colt agreed seriously. "It's people believing in law enough to bring their grievances to court instead of settling them with lead. It's what civilization looks like." A year ago, Clara had stood in a church basement, rallying frightened citizens to stand against tyranny. Now she sat with her husband, planning curriculum and considering how many new teachers they'd need. The transformation seemed miraculous, but she knew better. It had been earned through courage, paid for in blood, and maintained through daily choices to be better than what came before. Penny for your thoughts. Colt prompted, just thinking how Sarah would have been proud not just of the academy, but of you, the man you've become, the life you've built. We've built, Colt corrected. None of this happens without you, Clara. You're the heart of this town's rebirth. Hearts don't beat alone. Clara replied, they need the whole body working together. That's what we have here, a community that functions because everyone does their part. Inside the house, the clock chimed midnight. Another day ending, another beginning. Tomorrow would bring 23 eager students, a new teacher to train, and the continuing work of building something lasting. Ready for bed? Colt asked. In a moment. Clara wanted to hold on to this, the peace, the promise, the profound ordinariness of a life reclaimed from violence. Just a little longer. They swayed gently. The sheriff and the schoolmarm who'd become so much more. Above them, stars wheeled in their courses, indifferent to human struggles but witness to human triumphs. Cedar Hollow slept, safe and free, its children dreaming of futures their parents had fought to secure. In the building that had once dealt in vice and violence, books waited for tomorrow's eager hands. Where men had died over cards and whiskey, children would live through words and wisdom. The transformation was complete, but the work continued would always continue, as long as people chose courage over fear, community over isolation, justice over oppression. Clara Barrett closed her eyes and smiled, feeling the steady heartbeat of the man beside her, the gentle pulse of a town reborn. They'd planted their feet and made their stand. Now came the harder task, tending what they'd planted, ensuring it grew strong and true. But that was tomorrow's work. Tonight, under Wyoming stars, in a town that had touched bottom and risen, two people who'd found each other in darkness sat in peaceful light, testament to the truth that love and courage could conquer any empire built on fear. The lucky spur was gone. The Cedar Hollow Academy stood in its place, and in that simple fact lay all the hope the future needed. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope you enjoyed following Clara and Colt's journey from that dangerous confrontation on Main Street to their triumph over tyranny and the building of a new future together. If you're listening to this story, I'd love to know where in the world you are. Please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts about Clara and Colt's adventure. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit that like button if you enjoyed this tale. And if you really want to help more people discover stories like this one, please hit the hype button to boost this video. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward the sunset and remember, sometimes the greatest adventures begin when ordinary people stand up for what's right.